The stars burned cold in a galaxy that had forgotten mercy. For 10,000 years, humanity had known only war. Endless, grinding, eternal. Worlds turned to ash beneath banners of gold and black. Faith was the only law, and freedom was a forgotten word. Then, in the silence between battles, the void screamed. A fracture tore across the fabric of real space, not the hiss of warp energy, but something older, purer. A surge of blue-white light spiraled through the darkness, burning against the shadows of the eye of Terra. Astropaths went blind, trying to see it. Navigators cried out in their trance, and from that storm a single form emerged, a man hurled through time itself. His body was wrapped in shattered ice, fragments of a forgotten age. His armor was simple, by the standards of this brutal future, but its colors were unlike any imperial heraldry. Deep blue, trimmed with white and emblazoned with a star. The cryostasis cracked. The ice fell away. He drew his first breath in 10,000 years of darkness. Captain Steve Rogers, Captain America, awoke beneath an alien sky. Around him stretched a wasteland of steel and fire, the ruins of a world that had long since surrendered hope. Great Gothic towers pierced the horizon like the bones of dead gods. The air reeked of oil, smoke, and prayer. Overhead, thunder roared, not from weather, but from orbital cannons. His instincts kicked in. He reached for his shield, cold, scarred, and somehow still whole, lying in the dust beside him. The sound of battle rolled closer. Drums of war, the stomp of metal feet, and the bark of orders in a language that twisted Latin and madness together. A voice echoed through the haze. "Purge the heretic! In the name of the Emperor! Fire!" Bolter rounds screamed through the air. The ground erupted beside him. Steve raised his shield. The first bullet struck, and ricocheted in a burst of blue light. He stood, shaking the dirt from his uniform, eyes burning with determination. He didn't know where he was. He didn't know when he was. But he knew this. These people were soldiers. Terrified, desperate, broken by something far greater than themselves. And if this universe had forgotten freedom, then he would remind it what it meant. He faced the advancing storm of metal-clad soldiers, the dying sky reflected in his shield. The old words rose unbidden, not as a slogan, but as a vow. "I can do this all day." And as the guns thundered again, the light of a lost century defied the darkness of the 41st millennium. It began long before the darkness of the 41st millennium, back in an age when stars still shone warm above a blue earth. Hydra's legacy had been buried, its weapons sealed away, its science erased from history. Or so the world believed. Deep beneath the ruins of an Arctic fortress, a forgotten Hydra cell stirred again. They had uncovered the Tesseract containment core, rusted, dormant, but not dead. Power still whispered inside it, a fragment of something not made for human hands. They sought to harness it, not for conquest this time, but for desperation. The 21st century was tearing itself apart. Nations fractured, leaders vanished, and war loomed once more. The Hydra scientists promised salvation. What they built instead was the end of a timeline. Energy pulsed through the ruined facility. The Tesseract flared, unstable, defiant, alive. Instruments shattered, walls burned blue. And in that instant, a figure stepped through the storm to stop them. Steve Rogers. The soldier, out of time, returned once again to fight the same old evil. He threw his shield. It struck the core dead center, splitting its containment ring. The feedback was catastrophic. The cube screamed like a living star, its light clawing at the walls, at the air, at him. He reached out, not to claim it, but to contain it. And reality answered. The explosion wasn't fire or thunder, it was silence, a silence so deep it swallowed sound, light, and thought. Steve felt himself torn between moments, between heartbeats, between worlds. He saw flashes, fragments of lives he had never lived, a world of bronze skies and angelic warriors, a city built on bones, a throne of gold that wept blood. And then, darkness. The warp opened, not the smooth elegance of science, but the chaos of creation itself. A wound in existence, the laws of physics screamed as the Tesseract's energy collided with the tides of the Imperium, the realm of demons, faith, and madness. Through that wound, Captain America fell. He plunged through a river of memories and screams through colors that didn't exist, through centuries collapsing into seconds. His body burned, his mind fractured, but at his core his purpose remained: protect, endure, fight. And then the fall ended. He burst from the rift like a meteor, trailing blue fire through the void, and struck the atmosphere of a dying world. Below him spread a planet of endless machinery and Gothic spires, oceans of molten metal, cities lit by cathedral flame. The heavens crawled with warships shaped like temples, their cannons aimed at eternity. The impact carved a crater of glowing glass. Alarms screamed across the surface. Imperial sensors tracked the anomaly. In orbit, a Mechanicus priest saw the readings and whispered, "By the Omnissiah, what god has fallen from the sky?" Amid the smoking pit, a single figure stirred. His armor torn, his shield still glowing faintly with Tesseract light. Captain America had crossed not just space, but reality itself. And he had landed in the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, a universe where hope was a crime and faith was fire. He rose slowly, the stars burning red above him. Breach behind him sealed with a dying hum, the last echo of his old world fading to silence. In its place, the warp whispered his arrival to every power that listened. The Imperium would soon see him as a weapon. The warp would see him as prey. And somewhere far away, in a golden tomb upon Terra, something ancient stirred. A faint pulse, like a heartbeat, echoing through the Emperor's throne. A new variable had entered his galaxy. A man who carried freedom in a place where only obedience survived. The fall ended not with silence, but with fire. Steve Rogers crashed through the lower atmosphere of a world already burning. Clouds of smoke and ash smothered the horizon. Oceans boiled. The land was a scar of industry and death. It was called Armageddon, a name earned 1,000 times over. The impact shook the ground for miles. When the dust cleared, he stood at the heart of a crater, his uniform torn, his body bruised but unbroken. Around him, the earth was blackened steel and slag. Thunder rumbled, not from storms, but from the constant roar of cannon fire. In the distance, he saw shapes, titanic silhouettes moving between the smog-choked spires, machines the size of buildings walking on legs of iron, their weapons glowing like suns. Above them, great ships rained fire upon the world. The air itself tasted of war. Then came the soldiers. Ranks of humans clad in heavy armor, faces hidden behind helmets marked with the aquila, the two-headed eagle of the Imperium. They moved, with mechanical discipline, their boots pounding in rhythm to shouted prayers. One of them saw him, small, unmarked, out of uniform, and raised a weapon unlike any Steve had seen. A bolter. It barked thunder. The round struck his shield and exploded in a shockwave of light. He staggered, planted his feet, and braced for more. Shouts followed, orders, confusion, and fear. "Identify yourself, mutant! Xenos filth! Purge it!" He tried to speak, but the words were drowned by the scream of an incoming flyer. A gunship swept overhead, engines howling, its hull covered in skulls and purity seals. It fired into the nearby ruins, vaporizing entire platoons of green-skinned monsters, orcs. The sky boiled with fire. Explosions rolled across the wasteland. An officer approached, his voice metallic through a vox grill. "By decree of the God Emperor, you are under investigation for heresy." "Lay down your weapon!" Steve lowered his shield but did not drop it. "I'm not your enemy," he said. "Whoever the Emperor is, I'm just trying to help." The officer hesitated. Then something hit the perimeter, massive, bellowing, green, and furious. The orcs had found them. The ground erupted as a warbike tore through the line. Bolters barked, men screamed. The officer was crushed beneath an axe the size of a door. Without thinking, Steve moved. He threw his shield. It tore through the orcs' armor, shattered its weapon, and returned to his hand in a single blur. The soldiers froze, stunned by the impossible precision. He shouted, "Get behind me!" They obeyed. For the next minute, the battlefield was chaos. Steve fought like the last soldier on Earth, darting between explosions, covering the wounded, deflecting fire. Each movement was instinct, honed through wars long dead. He was a spark of the old world burning against the endless night. When the last orc fell, the soldiers looked upon him in silence. Their faith had no place for miracles that bled and breathed. The sergeant stepped forward, voice shaking. "What are you, stranger?" Steve looked up at the ruined sky, where cathedral warships loomed over a dying planet. "I'm a soldier," he said quietly. "Just not from here." He glanced at the symbol carved into the sergeant's armor, the mark of the Imperium of Man, and something in his chest tightened. Because if this was mankind's future, it had lost everything he'd once fought to protect. And in that moment, he understood. This wasn't just another battlefield. This was an entire galaxy at war with its own soul. The wind howled through the smoke, carrying the sound of distant cannons. Captain America stood among strangers, surrounded by death and devotion, his shield cracked but still unbroken. The galaxy had forgotten freedom, but it had just remembered hope. The silence that followed the battle was heavier than the smoke. The soldiers of the Imperium stood around him in wary formation, rifles raised, purity seals fluttering in the scorched wind. Their discipline never wavered, but their eyes betrayed confusion. They had seen men kill orcs before, but not like this. Not with precision, not with purpose. And certainly not with a shield. An officer finally broke the stillness. His voice came through the vox with the hiss of static and authority. "Secure the anomaly. The Inquisition will want him alive." Steve raised his hand slowly. "I don't want trouble," he said. "Too late," the officer replied. "You're already in it." They shackled him in chains of steel and sigils, wards etched in the name of their god, the Emperor of Mankind. When the restraints locked, a faint pain burned through his arms, like the metal itself rejected what it couldn't understand. He didn't resist. He'd been a prisoner before. He knew what patience meant. The soldiers marched him across the ruins of the battlefield. Burning orc corpses littered the ground. Titans strode in the distance, each step shaking the earth. Overhead, the black sky was pierced by the glow of orbital fire. They boarded a gunship. The engine screamed. As the craft lifted off, Steve looked down on Armageddon's surface, a graveyard world choked with smoke and iron. Entire cities lay shattered. Millions fought, bled, and died under banners of faith. He whispered to himself, "What happened to us?" Hours passed before they reached orbit. The ship docked with a massive cruiser, half fortress, half cathedral, its hull carved with prayers and skulls. He was led through halls of burning incense and flickering light, surrounded by robed figures whispering litanies. Everywhere he looked, he saw devotion built on fear. Soldiers kneeled before altars. Servo skulls drifted through the air, watching him with hollow eyes. The air was heavy with sanctity and rot. They brought him before a figure draped in black and red, an inquisitor of the Ordo Xenos, a man who wore faith as armor and suspicion as a weapon. "State your name," the inquisitor said, his voice calm, precise, deadly. "Steve Rogers," he answered. "Captain, United States Army." The inquisitor tilted his head. "There are no states."
"No armies by that name? You speak heresy in ignorance. Where are you from?" "Earth," Steve replied simply.
"You call it?"
"Terra." That word hung in the air like a curse.
The guards tensed. The inquisitor's eyes narrowed. No man from Holy Terra would speak so plainly of it. "You mock the Emperor's cradle." Steve met his gaze without fear. "If your Emperor is what you say he is, he wouldn't need mockery. He'd need truth." A murmur of outrage rippled through the chamber. But the Inquisitor lifted a hand. "Truth is for the damned," he said. "Faith is for the living." He leaned closer, studying Steve's shield, its star glimmering faintly under the ship's red light. "This relic," he murmured, "is not of the Mechanicus, nor of any sanctioned forge world. Its composition is unknown, yet it deflects mass-reactive rounds as though the laws of matter bow to it." "Such technology reeks of witchcraft," Steve frowned. "Where I come from, it's just science."
"And a lot of hard work." The Inquisitor's lips twisted.
"Then your world was blessed or cursed with understanding long lost to us." He paced slowly. "Perhaps you are a mutant, perhaps a demon in human form. The warp births many deceits."
"But," he paused,
"you fought with courage. That earns you an audience before judgment." The guard stepped back. Steve stood tall even in chains.
"I'm not your enemy," he said again.
The Inquisitor's eyes softened, barely. "That remains to be seen." Outside the observation window, Armageddon burned. Inside, two men from different eternities faced each other, one forged by faith, the other by freedom. And though neither knew it, the galaxy had begun to shift. Because the moment Captain America spoke in the tongue of truth, the Imperium of Man felt something it had not known in 10,000 years. Doubt. The chamber was silent, save for the hum of the ship's reactors and the distant echoes of a choir chanting prayers somewhere deep within the hull. Captain America sat in a steel chair bolted to the floor, his wrists bound by shimmering energy chains. The walls around him were carved with symbols, some religious, others scientific, all meant to contain what they didn't understand. The door hissed open. The Inquisitor entered once more, flanked by a pair of towering figures encased in ornate armor. The black and gold of the Adeptus Custodes, guardians said to have once stood beside the Emperor himself. Their presence meant this was no simple interrogation. This was judgment. The Inquisitor's voice cut through the air, calm but sharp as a blade. "You claim to be a soldier of Terra. You wield a weapon unknown to our forges. Your armor bears no mark of the Imperium, and your tongue speaks freely of freedom, a word outlawed on 1,000 worlds. So tell me, Captain Rogers, what are you?" Steve's answer came quiet, steady. "A man trying to do what's right." The Inquisitor paced in a slow circle around him. "What is right to you when all that exists is war?" When heresy festers in every shadow and loyalty is the only truth that keeps mankind alive. Steve looked up, meeting the man's eyes. Then maybe that's the problem. You've forgotten what you're fighting for. The custodes shifted, their armor groaning softly with restrained anger. The Inquisitor, though, smiled faintly. Idealism?
How quaint.
You sound like the rebels of ancient myth, the ones crushed under the Emperor's vision of unity. I don't care about myths, Steve said. I've seen what happens when good men stay silent, when people let fear decide for them. The Inquisitor stopped. And what would you do differently, soldier? Steve exhaled slowly, his voice low but firm. Back home, I fought a war against tyranny, against those who believed power made them gods. If that's what your Emperor stands for, then I'm not on his side. But if he fought to protect the innocent, then maybe we're not so different. The Inquisitor's expression darkened. You dare compare yourself to the God Emperor? I'm not comparing, Steve replied.
I'm remembering. Silence again.
For a moment, the Inquisitor's mask of faith wavered. Beneath centuries of doctrine, something flickered. Curiosity. He turned to one of the custodes. Bring the relic. A sealed case was placed on the table. Within it, the fragments of the Tesseract core pulsed faintly, blue light bleeding through cracks in containment runes. This object came through the breach with you, the Inquisitor said. It resists all analysis. Our most advanced servitors failed to measure its energy. Even the tech priests call it divine. Steve's jaw tightened.
It's not divine. It's dangerous. Then you understand it. I understand what it does to people, Steve said.
It gives them power, and then it takes everything else away. The Inquisitor studied him for a long moment. If that is true, then perhaps you are not its master, but its prisoner. He leaned closer, eyes glinting in the dim light.
Tell me, Captain.
Did it bring you here, or did it choose you? Steve hesitated. He didn't know.
Maybe both.
The Inquisitor saw the uncertainty and smiled. Then we are alike, both of us bound by forces greater than we understand. The difference is, I kneel to mine. He turned away, clasping his hands behind his back. You will remain aboard this vessel under watch. You will assist the Mechanicus in studying this artifact. And should you prove false, he gestured to the custodes.
You will be purified. Steve didn't move.
His gaze drifted to the window, a vast expanse of stars, broken only by the burning world below. Tell me something, he said softly. Do you ever wonder if your Emperor wanted it this way? A galaxy of slaves calling it peace? The Inquisitor paused at the doorway. For 10,000 years, he said, we have wondered nothing. That is why we endure. The door sealed behind him, leaving Steve alone with the hum of the ship and the cold pulse of the Tesseract's light. He stared at it, the glow reflecting off his eyes. It had brought him across realities, through war and ruin, into a place where hope was a sin, and somewhere deep inside him something whispered, maybe this is why you're here. The soldier clenched his fists. Whatever the reason, he would not let this world break him, because freedom was not a relic. It was a fight. Yes. Are you remembering the instructions that include narration-type story and other characteristics? The Inquisitor's ship drifted through the cold abyss, its hull gleaming like black glass, its engines whispering prayers to keep the warp at bay. Within its sanctified halls, Captain America remained a guarded secret, an anomaly wrapped in mystery and faith, but even secrets echo in a galaxy starved for wonder. Word spread among the crew of a man who defied bolter fire, who fought without fear, who bore no sigil of the Emperor, yet survived his judgment. Some whispered he was a saint reborn. Others called him a demon cloaked in flesh, and in the cathedrals of Terra those whispers reached higher ears. Across the vast distance of space, within the golden throne, the Emperor's body sat unmoving. 10,000 souls chanted his name, their voices trembling through eternity. Yet, in that silence, something shifted. For the first time in 1,000 years, a faint pulse tremored within the warp, a flicker of awareness, distant, cold, immeasurable. Those near the throne felt it and wept. The Astronomicon, the Emperor's psychic light that guided all of humanity, flickered for a heartbeat, as if acknowledging the arrival of something not born of this universe, yet bound to its destiny. Back aboard the Inquisitor's ship, Steve stood in his quarters, bare walls, dim light, air heavy with incense and oil. His shield rested against the bulkhead, its surface marred but still gleaming faintly with blue light. He stared at it, not as a weapon, but as the last piece of home he would ever know. Everywhere he looked in this galaxy, he saw devotion without compassion, faith without understanding. Entire worlds lived and died for a man trapped on a throne, a god who demanded everything and gave nothing in return. He couldn't accept that. The door slid open. The Inquisitor entered quietly, his robe trailing smoke from the censers that hung at his belt.
"Captain Rogers," he said, voice low, "you have become an inconvenience." Steve's brow furrowed. "I thought I was your guest," the Inquisitor smiled faintly.
Guests do not inspire doubt among my men. You speak of freedom, of choice.
"These are dangerous words here." Steve crossed his arms.
Where I come from, dangerous words are the ones worth saying. The Inquisitor studied him for a long moment. You cannot imagine what it means to keep humanity alive in this age. The Xenos, the heretics, the demons, they claw at our every breath. Unity is the only shield we have left. Doubt is death. Steve's voice softened.
"Then maybe you've already died."
"And you just don't know it yet." The Inquisitor turned away, silent. Through the viewport, the void glimmered with the faint blue glow of the Astronomicon, flickering like a candle in an endless night. "That light you see," the Inquisitor said finally, "is the Emperor's will. It guides every ship through the warp. Without it, we are blind."
He looked back at Steve. "Are a spark that could dim it."
"And that, Captain, I cannot allow." He left without another word. Steve exhaled, his breath trembling. For the first time since he'd fallen through the rift, he understood the scale of what he faced. This wasn't just another regime or warlord. This was an empire built on worship, on fear, on a god who might not even live. And yet, somewhere deep within that divine machinery, something had felt his presence, something ancient, weary, watching. The Emperor's shadow stretched far and cold across the stars. But within it, for the first time in millennia, something small and human began to glow. Freedom had entered his domain, and even the god of mankind could feel its weight. Days passed in silence aboard the Inquisitor's ship, the air thick with unease. Then came the summons. An alarm blared through the sanctum decks. Not the quiet call of ritual, but the raw sound of danger. Voxcasters screamed orders. Servitors clanked through corridors. The world below was under siege once more. Armageddon burned again. The Orc warlord Gazgkul's latest horde had torn through the planetary defenses. Whole cities drowned in fire. Armored columns of green-skinned monsters swept across the plains, howling for slaughter. Imperial Guard regiments were breaking. The Inquisitor approached Steve's cell, his expression grim. "You wanted to serve? Then serve. Let the Emperor judge you by your deeds." Moments later, the hangar doors opened. The soldiers who had once feared him now marched beside him, their armor scratched, faces grey with exhaustion. They did not believe he was human, but they believed he could fight. The dropship roared through the choking clouds and slammed into the battlefield. Steve stepped out into a
storm of death. The steel plains stretched, endless before him, a wasteland
of wrecked tanks, twisted metal, and burning sky. Dozens of regiments clashed in the distance. tiny against the walking mountains of war machines and the monstrous silhouettes of the orcs. The air shook with artillery. He moved among the Imperial lines, soldiers staring as he passed. Their morale was shattered. "Their leader's dead," a young guardsman whispered. "He doesn't even wear armor," another muttered. "He doesn't need it." Then the orcs came. They descended in a tide of green muscle and smoke-belching engines, crude banners fluttering in the storm.
Massive sluggers fired, explosions lighting the horizon. The Imperial line faltered. Steve Rogers raised his shield. The first impact hit like a tank shell.
He deflected it, the shock wave rippling through his arm, then charged forward, faster than any human eye could follow. He moved through the ranks like a storm, breaking the tide, shield flashing, fists striking like thunder. Every blow echoed across the line. Every deflection, every movement inspired the soldiers around him. "Push forward," he shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Hold the line!" They obeyed.
Not because of faith, not because of fear,
but because for the first time in their lives, someone led them without demanding worship. An orc knob roared and charged, swinging a jagged cleaver the size of a man. Steve caught it on his shield, forced it aside, and drove his fist through the monster's jaw. The impact shattered bone and sent the creature sprawling. The soldiers behind him opened fire, shouting his name not as a prayer, but as a rallying cry. Even the Inquisitor, watching from afar through an Auspex feed, said nothing. He could not deny what he saw, courage without fanaticism, discipline born not of fear, but of will. Then the sky split open. From the clouds descended an Imperial Valkyrie gunship, its engines burning red.
It screamed overhead, releasing a dozen figures clad in blue ceramite, ultramarines, the Emperor's chosen. They hit the ground like thunder.
Their bolters barked holy death. The orcs scattered before them. At their head marched Captain Titus, his armor marked with the scars of 100 wars. He turned his helm toward Steve. "You fight well, stranger." Steve nodded, breathing hard.
"And you lead well?"
"I'll follow your command." Titus regarded him for a long moment. "No, you will fight beside me." The two soldiers, one from the past, one from the far future, stood shoulder to shoulder as the horde closed in again. "Form a perimeter." Titus roared.
"Purge them with bolter and faith."
"Faith?" Steve said quietly, raising his shield. "I'll stick with hope." And then the battle resumed, a storm of fire and courage on a field of endless steel. By nightfall, the orcs lay in ruins. The survivors fled back into the wastelands. When dawn rose, the Imperial banners still flew, tattered but standing. Among them, a single symbol gleamed brighter, a star upon a shield, burning blue against the grey sky. The Inquisitor's report would call it an anomaly, an unclassified variable, but the soldiers would remember it differently. They would say that on the day hope returned to Armageddon, a man with no faith stood in front of the faithful and refused to fall. When the smoke cleared, the battlefield was nothing but ruin and ash. The dead lay in mountains, human and orc alike, their bodies smouldering beneath the crimson dawn. The air still trembled with the echoes of war, the sound of bolters fading into silence, the distant hymns of the survivors rising into the wind. Captain America stood among them, his shield buried halfway in the dirt, streaked with blood and soot. The blue star at its center reflected the dying light of the sun. Around him, soldiers of the Imperium knelt in exhausted prayer, thanking the Emperor for survival they hadn't earned. Steve watched them, heads bowed, whispers trembling. He didn't speak. He didn't understand their words, only their fear. Captain Titus approached, his heavy armor dented and scorched, his sword dripping green blood. Even kneeling, the Space Marine towered over him like a living monument. "You fought with honor," Titus said. "Your courage has given these men strength," Steve nodded, eyes scanning the field. "Courage shouldn't need permission," Titus regarded him quietly. "Courage without faith is hollow. The Emperor watches over us all. It is by his will we stand," Steve's gaze hardened. "Where I come from, we stand because someone has to, not because someone told us to." The Space Marine tilted his head, his voice a low rumble. "Then your world must have been very different." Steve sighed. "It was, and maybe that's why it died." They walked together through the wreckage, passing the wounded and dying. Medici servitors worked in silence, their mechanical limbs drenched in blood. Priests moved among the soldiers, marking foreheads with holy oils, whispering absolution to those who would never rise again. A young guardsman caught Steve's hand as he passed. The boy's face was pale, his eyes wide with fear.
"Sir," he whispered, "was it true?"
"Did the Emperor send you?" Steve paused, kneeling beside him. The boy couldn't have been older than 16. "No," Steve said gently. "The Emperor didn't send me."
"You did, all of you."
"Someone had to stand up. That's all I've ever done." The boy's breathing slowed. He smiled faintly, as if those words alone had been enough, and then the light in his eyes went out. Steve bowed his head. Titus watched him, silent, unreadable. Later they stood on a ridge overlooking the plains. Fires burned to the horizon. The Imperium's banners fluttered like torn scripture. Titus broke the silence. "You are an outsider, yet you fight like one of us. You could serve the Imperium. We could give you purpose." Steve turned toward him, the wind tugging at his tattered uniform. "I already have one. And what is that?" "To make sure men like you never forget who you're fighting for." Titus said nothing. His armor hummed softly in the wind. Below them, the Mechanicus crews scavenged the wreckage, chanting in binary canticles as they gathered the remains of Orc technology. Among the ruins, Steve caught sight of the Inquisitor. Hands folded behind his back.
Eyes fixed on him from across the battlefield. The man who had chained him now watched him like a question that refused to die.
Later that night, in the makeshift command outpost, Steve found himself summoned once more. The Inquisitor stood beside a flickering hololith map, his expression sharp, deliberate. "You've unsettled them," he said, without turning. "The soldiers speak your name in reverence. They call you the Star-Bearer. Some even claim you carry the Emperor's light." Steve's voice was calm. "Then they're wrong." The Inquisitor turned slowly.
"Are they?"
"You deflect bullets with a relic no forge can reproduce. You move faster, strike harder, endure wounds that would kill an Astartes. That is not the mark of a mortal man." "It's the mark of someone who doesn't quit," Steve said simply. The Inquisitor studied him for a long, unbroken moment. "You don't understand, Captain."
"Here, faith is what keeps the galaxy alive."
"Not strength, not courage, faith." Steve's tone sharpened. "Faith without reason isn't strength. It's control. You don't believe because it gives you hope. You believe because it keeps you obedient." The Inquisitor's eyes narrowed. "Careful, heretic." Steve stepped forward, voice low but unyielding. "You call me heretic because I don't bow. But where I come from, you don't need a god to do the right thing." For a heartbeat, neither spoke. The only sound was the hum of the hololith and the whisper of the ship's reactors in orbit above. Then, without warning, the Inquisitor smiled, not out of kindness, but curiosity. "You will never survive here," he said quietly, "but the galaxy will remember you, for better or worse." He turned and walked away, robes trailing across the dust. Steve looked down at his shield. Scratched, cracked, but unbroken. The same could be said for him. He looked toward the dark horizon where the sun had already died behind smoke. In that moment he made himself a promise. He would not change for this universe. He would make it remember what change looked like, and somewhere far away, in the unseen depths of the warp, something ancient stirred, faintly, curiously, as if the concept of freedom had whispered its name into eternity. The campaign on Armageddon lasted weeks. When it finally ended, victory was declared not by cheers, but by silence. Only the living remained to count the cost. As the wounded were gathered and the dead sanctified, Captain America was summoned once more, this time not by the Inquisition, but by the red-robed priests of the Adeptus Mechanicus. They arrived in a procession of steel and static, men turned half-machine, their flesh hidden beneath cables and cogwork, their faces concealed behind masks etched with sacred code. The air shimmered with incense and ozone as they approached, chanting in binary prayer. The lead tech priest stepped forward, his voice layered with static distortion. Subject anomalous relic. Composition unknown. Energy readings divergent from all Imperial standards. You will accompany us to the forge. Steve looked to Titus, who stood nearby. Is this an invitation or an order? Titus replied evenly. To them, there is no difference. They took him beneath the plains, down through tunnels of rusted steel and forgotten engines, into the forge of Helios Prime, a cathedral built not for worship of gods but for machinery.
Vast pillars of bronze pistons rose into the darkness, their movements slow and endless.
Gears the size of buildings turned like the heartbeat of a dying world. In the center, a colossal machine shrine glowed faintly with data streams and pulsing energy. It was there that they brought his shield. Dozens of servitors moved in silence, mechanical arms unfolding to scan the surface. Hollow runes danced across the air, displaying readings that broke every known limit. Material. Unclassified. Density exceeds adamantium by 34. Vibrational harmony. Impossible.
This substance defies categorization, droned one tech priest. Another approached the Inquisitor, whispering through vox bursts. Perhaps
A gift of the Omnissiah. A fragment of the machine god. The Inquisitor crossed his arms. Or a weapon of heresy. Steve stood by quietly, watching their awe curdle into fear.
it's just a shield, he said. It's not divine. The tech priest turned toward him, metallic eyes flaring.
Blasphemy. To deny the machine's spirit is to deny its purpose. Steve stepped closer, voice steady. Where I come from, purpose comes from people. The tools are only as good as the hands that use them. The priests fell silent. Their mechanical limbs froze mid-motion. For a brief moment, the sanctity of their faith wavered. Then one of the scanning arrays sparked. Energy surged through the shrine. The entire chamber lit up with a pulse of blue-white light, the same color that had brought Steve across universes. The tech priests scrambled to stabilize their systems, shouting in bursts of static and panic. The Inquisitor drew his weapon. What is happening? The lead Magos stared at the shield, his synthetic voice trembling. The relic. It is communing. Its resonance matches no known pattern. It speaks in frequencies beyond human comprehension. The light spread outward, touching the walls, the machines, the very air. For a second, the forge sang, a chorus of harmony that wasn't mechanical, but alive. Then, as quickly as it began, it ended. The light faded. The hum died. The priests fell to their knees, murmuring prayers. Steve reached for his shield. It was warm to the touch, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. He looked at the Inquisitor. Now do you see?
It's not your god.
It's a memory of something better. The Inquisitor said nothing. Behind his eyes, faith and fear battled for control. The tech priest rose slowly. We will study this further. The Omnissiah demands understanding. Steve turned away. And start by understanding yourselves. He left the forge, the sound of chanting fading behind him. Outside, the world burned quietly under the light of a distant sun. He could feel the weight of this new galaxy pressing down on him, its laws, its cruelty, its blind faith. But deep beneath the noise of machines and prayers, another sound stirred, soft, familiar, human, the sound of doubt. And in that, Steve found his first victory. That night, the stars above Armageddon flickered like dying embers. The air was still, yet the silence carried weight, something unseen pressing against reality itself. Steve Rogers didn't sleep. He sat alone beside the wreckage of a burned-out Chimera tank, his shield resting across his knees. The faint blue veins of the Tesseract's energy still pulsed through its surface, a heartbeat that wasn't his own. The wind howled, low and strange. It wasn't the sound of nature, it was something deeper, something alive. He raised his head slowly. For a moment he thought he heard a voice. It wasn't human speech, not even words, more like a vibration that crawled into his thoughts, whispering across the edges of his mind. "They see you." Steve froze. His instincts sharpened. He scanned the horizon, nothing but smoke and ruin. But the voice continued, threading through his skull like static, the light. "It does not belong here." He stood, shield in hand. His breath clouded the air, though the night wasn't cold. "What are you?" he asked aloud. The wind answered, carrying laughter, not joyful, but ancient, cruel, and endless. In the warp, the immaterium stirred. The echo of the Tesseract's energy had rippled across that psychic sea, and the things that dwelled within it, creatures made from hate and hunger, had noticed. Demons turned their gaze toward the anomaly. To them, Steve's presence was a wound in reality, a spark of order burning inside their chaos. The gods of the warp, Khorne, Tsench, Nurgle, and Slaanesh, felt that spark like a challenge. To the blood god Khorne, it was defiance. To Tzeentch, it was potential. To Nurgle, it was a mockery of decay. And to Slaanesh, it was purity untainted by temptation. They whispered his name in mockery. The Starbearer, the false saint, the soldier who bleeds hope. And from those whispers, something began to gather far across the stars. In a realm where time bled and thought took shape, a throne of brass rose from rivers of blood. Upon it sat a creature vast and terrible, Khorne, the blood god himself. His skull-covered crown gleamed as he turned his gaze toward the material world. Through the howling of 1,000,000,000 dead, his voice thundered across the warp.
"Who dares bring light into my storm?"
The void trembled. Back on Armageddon, Steve fell to one knee, gripping his head as visions burned through his mind, flashes of endless war, of red skies, of worlds torn apart by rage. His pulse quickened, his shield vibrated with the same strange energy. And then, just as suddenly, the vision stopped. The night went silent once more. He looked around. Nothing. Just the ruins, the ash, the faint hum of distant machinery. But deep down, he knew something had seen him. Something vast, violent, and ancient now knew his name. He pressed a hand to his chest, steadying his breathing. The Tesseract's power inside him, whatever remnants had fused during his fall, was no longer dormant. It had been noticed. The Inquisitor would soon sense the disturbance. The Mechanicus would call it a sign. The priests would call it a prophecy. Steve just called it trouble. He stared into the endless night, the reflection of distant lightning flashing across his eyes. "They can whisper all they want," he said quietly. "I've fought worse things than fear." And in the warp, something laughed again, soft, knowing, and cruel, because for the first time in 10,000 years,
a voice had spoken back to it. And the warp never forgets a challenge. Across the warp,
the laughter faded, And the silence that followed was worse. It was the silence of hunger waiting to be fed. The power that had brushed against Steve Rogers's soul had not gone unnoticed. It had been marked. And now, in a realm where time meant nothing, Khorne, the blood god, stirred upon his brass throne. Rivers of gore boiled beneath his feet. Skulls of 1 billion fallen warriors formed mountains around him. His gaze turned toward the mortal plane. The spark of blue light, the foreign soul, the anomaly, had burned against his dominion of rage. To a god of slaughter, that was an insult, and Khorne did not forgive insults. He bellowed one command to his legions: "Find the Starbearer, feed his courage to me." The warp convulsed. Reality tore. On the borders of Armageddon's system, the skies split open as warp space vomited forth a tide of blood-red ships, their hulls etched with runes of hate. Demon engines screamed into real space, their wings dripping flame, their mouths chanting one name over and over: Khorne! 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 The Imperium called it a warp incursion. To Steve, it was something far worse, a nightmare given form. The Inquisitor's ship sounded the alarm as astropathic distress signals flared across the fleet. A demonic presence breaches the veil.
Prepare planetary defenses. Invoke exterminators protocols.
Steve was already moving. "If you destroy the planet, you'll kill everyone on it," the Inquisitor snapped. "Better the innocent dead than the Imperium tainted." "Then you're no better than the monsters coming for you." Before the Inquisitor could reply, the ship shook violently. The hull screamed as if alive.
Alarms wailed.
The lights flickered to red. Through the viewport, Steve saw the impossible, a crimson storm raging in orbit, shapes moving within it massive, horned silhouettes of demon princes, their armor fused to flesh, their weapons formed from the essence of hatred itself. And at the center of the storm stood Khan the Betrayer, champion of the blood god, his chain axe roaring, his laughter echoing across the void. When his fleet descended, it wasn't an invasion, it was judgment. Armageddon burned anew. The ground quaked as demonic portals opened across the surface. From them poured legions of the damned, berserkers, possessed, creatures of brass and fury. Every step they took turned soil to ash. Every roar drowned the prayers of the faithful. Steve landed amidst the chaos, his drop pod crashing into the ruins of what had once been a fortress city. Around him, Imperial soldiers fought and died, overwhelmed by the sheer weight of madness. He raised his shield. The first demon lunged, a thing of fire and bone. Steve met it head-on, shield glowing blue against the creature's molten axe. The impact thundered across the field.
Sparks and blood rained. He pushed back, driving his shield through its chest.
The demon howled and burst into dust. But more came, hundreds, endless, unrelenting. He fought till his arms trembled. Every swing, every strike burned with the light of the Tesseract, the light of a different reality. And still the warp whispered,
"Fight, mortal.
Bleed for us.
Rage for us." He could feel it, trying to crawl inside him, to twist his resolve into fury.
But the soldier in him, the man forged in defiance, refused. "Not today," he growled, and drove his shield into another monster's skull. Overhead, Captain Titus and his ultramarines arrived like angels of war, descending on jets of blue fire. Bolters roared, thunderhammers fell, and demons died by the dozen. Titus landed beside Steve, his armor scarred and glowing with heat.
"This world is lost," he shouted. "We must fall back."
Steve shook his head.
"I don't run." Titus looked at him for a moment, then nodded once.
"Then we make our stand." The two warriors fought side by side, flesh and machine, mortal and post-human, against the fury of a god. And deep within the warp, Khorne watched, his laughter rolling across eternity. "This one does not kneel," he growled. "Good, his skull will shine brightest on my throne." The storm spread, swallowing cities, fleets, entire continents. The Imperium's might crumbled beneath the tide, and at the heart of it, one man stood unmoved, his shield cracked, his armor blackened, his body bleeding, but his spirit unbroken. Because Captain America had faced gods before, and in every world his answer was always the same. He stood his ground. The world was ending again. Armageddon's skies burned red as hive cities became pyres. From orbit, the once mighty spires of civilization looked like candles flickering in a storm.
One by one they were snuffed.
Out under the advance of demons and fire, Hive Perdition was the last to fall. It was a city built in defiance of death, a labyrinth of steel and smoke where billions had once lived,
stacked upon each other like bones in a crypt.
Now only a handful of survivors remained, entrenched in its central bastion, surrounded by ruin. Captain America stood atop its highest wall, shield resting against his shoulder. The air shimmered with heat and ash. His uniform was torn, his body bruised, his every breath heavy, but his eyes still burned with purpose. Around him stood the remnants of the 19th Cadian, their armor cracked, their banners tattered.
Every man and woman looked to him, not because he was one of them, but because he refused to break. "Hold this line," Steve said, voice steady despite the thunder in the distance.
"You've held worse."
"You've survived worse."
"Today," he paused, glancing at the burning horizon, "we remind them that courage doesn't die when the light fades." The soldiers didn't answer with words. They simply nodded. Some wept. Others gripped their rifles tighter. Below, the first wave of the enemy came into view. Berserkers of Khorne, their armor etched with runes that bled light, charging through the wreckage like red lightning. Behind them, mechanical behemoths, demon engines of brass and fire, walked on clawed limbs, their cannons howling with infernal energy. The ground trembled with every step. The Inquisitor's voice cracked over the vox. "Captain Rogers, fall back to the inner sanctum. The defenses won't hold." Steve's eyes stayed fixed on the enemy. "Then we make them hold." He raised his shield. "For everyone who still believes." And then the world exploded into chaos. The first wave hit the walls like a living avalanche. Bolters roared, lasguns screamed, and the air turned into a storm of fire and shrapnel. Guardsmen fell screaming, torn apart by chain blades and claws, but others surged forward to fill the gaps. Steve leapt into the fray. His shield became a flash of blue and silver in the red light, a blur of deflection and impact. Every strike broke bones or shattered steel. His movements were faster now, guided by something beyond human strength, the faint pulse of tesseract energy thrumming in his veins. He slammed his shield into the chest of a berserker, caving in the armor with a sound like thunder. Another swung a chain axe at his head. Steve ducked under it, caught the weapon mid-swing, and used the enemy's own momentum to hurl him over the wall. Blood sprayed the air.
Smoke choked the sky. And still they came. At his side, Captain Titus carved through the enemy like a storm-given flesh, his thunder hammer cracking demons into flame. "They are endless,"
he shouted over the roar. "So are we," Steve answered. "For every man that fell, another rose. For every wall that cracked, another defense was built atop the rubble." The battle raged for hours, maybe days. Time had no meaning in this kind of war. Then the ground split. The wall shuddered. From beneath Hive Perdition's foundations came a new horror, a demon engine larger than any titan, a fusion of flesh and forge. Its face was a skull of molten brass, its eyes burning with the fury of the warp. The soldiers faltered. Even Titus hesitated. Steve didn't. He ran. Straight toward the thing, bolts of warp energy screamed past him. The air warped around the creature's roar. But Steve didn't slow down. He vaulted over debris, deflecting blasts with his shield. Sprinting through a storm of fire, he reached its base, leapt onto a shattered pipe, and climbed. Every motion was agony, every pull of his muscles fueled by will alone. When he reached its chest, he jammed his shield into a crack of molten metal and pulled himself up higher. The daemon shrieked, clawing at him. Steve swung his shield into its exposed core, the impact sending a burst of blue light through the monster's body. The energy, foreign to this universe, ripped through it like a virus,
unraveling its warp-bound soul. The demon exploded from within,
collapsing into a heap of burning steel and bone. Steve landed hard, the blast wave throwing him across the ruins. His shield clattered beside him, cracked in half down the center. He struggled to his feet, coughing, staring at the shattered remains of his only weapon. And still, through the smoke,
more demons came. He looked back at the soldiers behind him, wounded, exhausted, terrified, but alive. He raised the broken shield and smiled.
Still got enough for one more round. From the horizon, the skies opened again, but this time the light was gold. Drop pods fell like meteors. War horns echoed through the firestorm. The Emperor's angels had come. A force of grey knights, the demon hunters of legend, descended upon the battlefield. Their silver armor gleamed against the blood-red sky, their psychic chants burning the air around them. They struck like divine judgment, cutting through the tide with blades wreathed in holy fire. As the first of them landed beside Steve, the leader turned to him, a towering figure wreathed in psychic light. "Who are you?" the knight asked. Steve straightened, voice calm, eyes unflinching. "Just a soldier." The knight studied him, then nodded once.
"Then fight with us, soldier."
"For the Emperor, or whatever god still listens." Steve smiled faintly.
"I fight for people."
"That's enough." Together they charged into the storm, and for the first time since the incursion began, Hive Perdition did not fall. It endured. The battle at Hive Perdition raged for 3 days and 3 nights. When dawn finally broke through the smoke, the light struggled to reach the ground, as if the heavens themselves hesitated to witness what had become of the city. Every street was a grave. Every wall was marked by fire, and amid the ruin stood the grey knights. Silent, shining, and terrible. Their armor was scripture in motion, every plate carved with prayers, every blade humming with psychic purity. They had come through the warp, not as men, but as answers to a question the galaxy hadn't dared to ask. Captain America stood among them, his uniform scorched, his shield now cracked and darkened. He breathed heavy, but his eyes were steady. Around him, the soldiers of the Imperium fell to their knees in reverence. Whispering the names of saints, the lead knight stepped forward, Justicar Asteran, a figure of silver and gold, his voice echoing like a sermon through an iron cathedral. "You fought the servants of Khorne and did not yield. Few mortals could stand as you have." Steve nodded slightly.
"I wasn't standing alone," Astrid studied him.
"You carry power that does not belong to this galaxy. The warp itself recoils from you, yet bends around your presence. Explain." Steve hesitated.
I don't even understand it myself."
"The energy inside me, it's from another world. A piece of something called the Tesseract.
It wasn't meant to come here. At the mention of the word, a murmur rippled through the grey knights.
They exchanged glances, and their psychic senses tasting something beyond the veil. The relic you describe, Astron said slowly, bears resemblance to the archaeotech of the ancients, or something even older, perhaps a shard of creation itself. The Inquisitor, bloodied but alive, stepped from the wreckage. Or a demon's trick, he spat.
You saw what it did to the forge.
You saw how it bent the laws of our world. It must be destroyed. Astron turned toward him, helm tilting slightly. You presume to command judgment on what you cannot comprehend. The Inquisitor sneered. I command in the name of the Emperor, Knight. Steve stepped between them.
Enough, the soldiers froze.
No one interrupted a Knight of Titan or an Inquisitor. No one but him. Steve's voice was calm, but carried through the smoke. Every time someone finds something they don't understand in this galaxy, their first instinct is to burn it, to kill it, to erase it. Maybe that's why you keep fighting the same wars for 10,000 years. The Inquisitor's hand twitched toward his bolt pistol. You tread close to heresy. Steve didn't flinch. Maybe heresy's just another word for hope. Astron raised a hand. The pistol lowered. Enough blood has been spilled here, he said. If this warrior is what I sense, if he truly stands untouched by the warp, then he may be more valuable than any relic. The knight approached Steve, his armored hand resting over his chest plate. The Grey Knights serve no master but the Emperor himself, and in all our campaigns across the Eye of Terra, we have never felt such defiance in the presence of the warp. Whatever power you carry,
it resists corruption. Steve looked at him. Because it's not power that keeps me standing.
It's choice. For the first time, Astron seemed to soften. Then you are rarer than any saint. Behind them, the sky began to tremble. The crimson clouds of the warp storm began to thin, retreating like smoke drawn into a void. The blood god's presence weakened. Khorne's armies were broken, scattered into the immaterium, their howls fading like thunder in another world. Hive Perdition had survived, barely. But survival in this galaxy was enough to be called victory. Astron turned toward the horizon. The warp quiets, but not for long. The storm will return. It always does. Steve looked down at his broken shield. The crack glowed faintly blue. Then I'll still be here when it does. The knight regarded him, then spoke softly as though reciting a prophecy. Then perhaps, Captain, you were not sent here by accident. Perhaps the Emperor, or whatever lies beyond even him, brought you here for a reason. Steve gave a faint, tired smile. Where I come from, we don't wait for gods to give us reasons. Astron bowed his head slightly. And maybe that's what makes you dangerous. The knight turned, his warriors moving in formation, their boots echoing through the hollow streets as they disappeared into the mist. The Inquisitor lingered, his expression unreadable. You've inspired faith, Captain. Dangerous faith. The kind that questions instead of obeys. Then maybe it's about time someone did, Steve replied. When he was alone again, the captain stood on the ruined wall, the wind tugging at his torn uniform. The fires of Hive Perdition burned beneath him, painting his silhouette in gold and red. He raised what was left of his shield. Not as a weapon, as a promise. The galaxy hadn't seen the last of Captain America, and the gods of the warp, now watching, curious and vengeful, would make sure of that. Weeks passed. The fires of Hive Perdition faded to smoke and ash. The dead were buried in the ruins of their own city, their names etched into walls that would never be rebuilt. But their stories survived. In the trenches,
on ships in the shadowed corners of hive worlds and manufactorums,
whispers began to spread, carried by weary soldiers, by wandering priests, by survivors who refused to forget. They spoke of a man not born of this galaxy, a warrior who fought demons with a broken shield, a mortal who stood against the servants of Khorne and did not fall. They called him the Star-Bearer. Some said he was a lost son of the Emperor, returned to guide the Imperium. Others claimed he was a living weapon of the machine god, cast into flesh to test mankind's resolve. And among the faithful, a few whispered a dangerous heresy, that he was proof the Emperor's light could burn outside the bounds of faith. Steve Rogers never asked to be a symbol, but in this world, symbols were all people had left. He travelled with what remained of the 19th Cadian, helping rebuild defences, escorting refugees, defending convoys through wastelands haunted by warp-born horrors. He carried his cracked shield across battlefields like a relic, though to him it was nothing more than a promise, a memory of the world he'd lost. Everywhere he went, people followed, farmers from frontier worlds,
miners from asteroid colonies,
soldiers who had lost their officers but not their will to fight. They built camps around him, then settlements, then strongholds. They painted stars on their armor and banners. They began calling themselves the Free Legion, a name that made inquisitors nervous and generals angry. Steve didn't lead them as a commander. He led them by standing first. When raiders struck, he stood at the gate. When storms hit, he lifted the fallen. When morale faltered, he spoke, not of gods or destiny or victory, but of choice. He told them, "You don't fight because someone orders you to. You fight because someone needs you to." And those words spread faster than any imperial decree. Soon fragments of his message reached even the ears of the ecclesiarchy. Priests debated his existence. Some called him a saint reborn in the emperor's image. Others condemned him as a false prophet, a relic of ancient heresy that could ignite rebellion. One high cardinal declared, "If such a man exists, then he is a test from the emperor himself, to see if we remember what purity means without chains." Inquisitors began hunting him, the Mechanicus began seeking him, and somewhere deep within the warp, the gods began whispering again. Tzeentch, the Lord of Change, turned his many faces toward the mortal plane and laughed softly.
"Hope," he murmured.
"A fragile thing. It will burn brighter the closer it moves to despair." Even Khorne, though defeated, still listened. His rage turning to fascination. The mortal defied me.
Perhaps I should let him live. Long enough to understand what defiance costs. But Steve didn't hear them. He only heard the people.
Their songs, their prayers, their hope. Each night he stood at the edge of the camp and watched the stars. They looked the same as they had on Earth, cold, distant, unreachable, but still they reminded him of home. He thought about his old world, the friends he'd lost, the wars he'd fought, the promise he'd made to keep standing even when no one else could. And now, in this galaxy of madness and faith, that promise mattered more than ever, because he had realized something the Imperium had forgotten. You don't need gods to be good. You just need the will to keep fighting when everything tells you not to. And as the Free Legion grew, the Imperium began to tremble, not because they feared him, but because they feared what his belief might awaken in others. The stories reached Terra within months. Whispers carried across astropathic channels, reports transmitted through cryptic code. Entire battalions spoke of the Star-Bearer who defied demons and united men without the Emperor's blessing. To the Imperium, such stories were more dangerous than heresy. They were inspiration, and inspiration, in a galaxy built on obedience, was treason. In the catacombs of a fortress monastery orbiting Mars, Inquisitor Veridon, the same man who had once ordered Steve's execution, stood before a conclave of robed figures. Hollow projections shimmered in the air, displaying the symbol of the Free Legion, a white star painted over the imperial aquila. The sight alone filled the chamber with unease. "He spreads faster than plague," Veridon said, his voice low, precise. "Entire regiments refuse orders to redeploy. Pilgrims march under his mark. Even among the guard, there are whispers that the Emperor's will now wears a mortal face." An older inquisitor, her flesh pale and translucent beneath augmetic implants, leaned forward, a heretic savior.
"Another prophet of the false dawn. You should have destroyed him when you had the chance." Veridon's jaw tightened. "I tried."
He survived the warp. He fights demons and lives. He stands in their presence without the taint of corruption. If I kill him now, he'll become a martyr. And if I let him live, he may become something worse. What could be worse than heresy? The woman asked. Veridon turned his gaze to the glowing hololith.
"Hope." The word hung in the air like poison. Another voice, cold and metallic, spoke from the shadows.
A tech priest of Mars, half machine, his vocalizer grinding with static. "We have analyzed residual energy from the Starbearer's relic. It is not warp-born."
"Not psychic. It is alien, outside known physics."
"Perhaps a fragment of pre-imperial science."
"Perhaps older," Veridon frowned.
"Older than the Emperor?" The priest nodded slowly.
"Possibly."
The readings match nothing in Mechanicus records, not even the lost Dark Age technologies. If it spreads, it could challenge the very foundation of the Omnissiah's divinity. That was enough to silence the room. Veridon's fingers drummed against the table. The ecclesiarchy has already issued sermons condemning his following. The Free Legion has been declared unclean, but they continue to grow.
"He's created something new, something we don't control." "Then control it," the old Inquisitor hissed. "Bend it or bury it." Veridon's gaze hardened.
"You cannot bend what refuses to kneel." For a long moment the room was silent. Then Veridon turned and walked toward the viewport. Outside, the red surface of Mars glowed beneath the light of its forges, the hum of endless creation vibrating through the station walls. He whispered to himself, "A man who fights without faith, who unites without fear." He could undo 10,000 years of order. Behind him, the conclave began to chant prayers for vigilance. But Veridon didn't join them, because deep down, beneath the layers of dogma and duty, a thought had taken root in his mind, one he dared not say aloud. What if the Starbearer was not defying the Emperor, but reminding the Imperium what he truly stood for? Across the galaxy, Steve Rogers knew nothing of these meetings.
Of the fear his name inspired in the halls of power. He was too busy helping rebuild another ruined world, a frontier colony crushed under Orc raids.
The people there had never seen an Inquisitor, never heard the Emperor's voice. But when they saw a man in torn blue armor raising defenses with his bare hands and standing guard through the night, they called him Hope Incarnate, and that hope spread again. Through the void, through whispers, through prayers. The Imperium's faith was cracking, not from blasphemy, but from awakening. And somewhere, Veridon stared at the stars and felt something cold crawl up his spine. It wasn't hatred, it was fear, because for the first time in his life, he wasn't sure who the heretic truly was. It began quietly, as all revolutions do. A message spoken in the dark by soldiers who had seen too much, who had bled too long for commanders they would never meet. A single phrase whispered between convoys and under-vox static. Stand because it's right, not because you're told to. The words spread like wildfire across the stars. First through the Cadian remnants, then to the hive militias of Necromunda. then across mining moons and frozen garrisons forgotten by the high lords of Terra. Everywhere the Free Legion passed, something changed. People began to question, why do we burn worlds that could be saved? Why do we obey priests who never fight? Why do we pray to a god who never answers? When a man with a broken shield did, the Imperium called it heresy, but to the downtrodden, it felt like truth. On the agri-world of Valis Prime, farmers laid down their tools to join Steve's ranks. On the manufactorums of Gathis 9, workers repainted the Aquila, replacing one of its wings with a star. And on the war-torn frontier of the Ghoul Stars, entire regiments defected, carrying the Star-Bearer's sigil into battle against Chaos warbands. They didn't chant the Emperor's name anymore. They chanted his. At first, Steve didn't realize how large it had become. He still moved from world to world like a soldier without an army, helping colonies rebuild, driving back orcs, diffusing planetary wars before they started. He didn't give orders. He just did what needed doing, but everywhere he went, the people followed. They built what they called freeholds, settlements, where the Emperor's law was replaced by a single creed. We fight for those who cannot. Soon, there were 12 freeholds, then 100. They traded resources, shared defense, and built fleets of repurposed Imperial ships. The symbol of the star began to appear on hulls and banners across entire sectors. It was no longer a rumor. It was a movement. The Inquisition called it the Star Rebellion. The Ecclesiarchy called it the Sin of the Living Saint. But to those who believed, it was the first time in living memory that freedom meant more than a word whispered before death. When word reached Captain Titus, he returned to find Steve standing on the edge of a new city, one built not from conquest, but cooperation. Servitors and civilians worked side by side. Tau defectors had even joined, their technology integrated with human craft. Titus approached him, his armor gleaming in the golden dawn.
Do you know what you've done, Captain?
Steve looked at the horizon.
Helped people stand on their own. You've done more than that, Titus said.
You've made them believe they don't need the Emperor to do it? Steve's eyes stayed fixed on the light. Maybe they don't, the Space Marine's tone darkened. You don't understand what that means.
You've shaken the Imperium's faith.
You've made them question their gods, their laws, and the Inquisition will never forgive that. Steve turned to face him. His voice was calm, unyielding. Then they'll have to live with it.
Because I'm not here to replace their faith. I'm here to give them back their choice. Titus stared at him for a long moment.
Behind his expressionless helm, a war brewed. Duty against admiration, doctrine against truth. Finally, he said, choice is dangerous in a galaxy built on fear. Steve nodded. That's why it's worth fighting for. Overhead, the stars flared. Ships began to appear. Dozens, then hundreds, bearing the mark of the Inquisition. The hunters had come. The freeholds were now seen not as rebels, but as enemies of the Imperium itself. Steve watched as the fleets aligned in orbit, their gunmetal hulls glowing with the light of burning reactors. He could feel it, another war rising. Not for survival this time, but for the soul of mankind. He looked at Titus one last time. If you ever believed in anything more than orders, he said softly, believe in them. Then he lifted his shield, empty, cracked, scarred, but unbroken, and walked toward the city walls, because if this galaxy wanted war, then he would remind it what courage looked like. The Imperium's vengeance came with thunder. For months, they had watched the rise of the freeholds, dismissing them as a fleeting insurrection, a heretical whisper that would die out in the shadow of the Ecclesiarchy's sermons. But whispers can outlast screams, and when faith falters, fear follows, so they gathered their wrath, 100 regiments of the Astra Militarum, dozens of inquisitorial strike fleets, a score of Space Marine chapters sworn to restore the Emperor's order. Together, they formed what history would call the Crusade of Light Reclaimed, though every world it touched was left in darkness. The first target, Freehold Epsilon, a city built in the bones of an old forge world. Its towers gleamed with gold and cobalt. Its people, human, Tau, even sanctioned mutants, lived side by side under the same star-marked banners. They had built homes without priests, laws without chains. They believed in the impossible, peace, and the Imperium called that heresy. The fleet descended like a storm. Orbital bombardments shattered the outer defenses. The sky turned to flame. Civilians ran for the bunkers as Thunderhawks screamed overhead, dropping squads of power-armored zealots into the streets. Captain America stood on the command platform of a rebuilt Valkyrie, watching it unfold through smoke-streaked glass. His jaw was set, his eyes cold. "They're bombing civilians," said a voice beside him. Commander Tashir, a former Imperial officer who had defected to the Free Legion. "They don't see civilians," Steve answered quietly.
"They see disobedience." He stepped onto the open ramp as explosions painted the horizon.
"Prep the evacuation routes. Get as many out as you can. I'll hold them off," Tashir stared at him.
"You can't stop an entire crusade." Steve tightened the straps of his shield.
"No, but I can make them remember who they're fighting." He leapt from the ramp into chaos. The impact cracked ferrocrete. He rose through dust and fire, shield raised. The first Space Marine charged, a hulking figure of crimson armor, purity seals fluttering, chains ward screaming holy oaths. "Heretic!" The warrior roared.
"You defy the will of the Emperor?"
Steve blocked the strike, sparks erupting.
"Then maybe the Emperor needs to remember his will." He slammed the Marine backward, disarming him with a spinning blow that dented ceramite.
When the warrior fell stunned, Steve didn't kill him. He turned away. And that mercy, more than any victory, echoed across the Vox channels like a revelation. All around, the Free Legion fought. Ragtag, underarmed, but relentless. Tau drones provided covering fire while human gunners manned salvaged Imperial tanks. Civilians carried ammunition. Children ferried water. Every hand that could move was part of the defense. From the skies, gunships screamed. From the streets, the people answered. The Inquisition broadcast their message across the system. By decree of Terra, all who bear the mark of the star are condemned. Their leader is a blasphemer.
Their creed poison.
No mercy shall be shown. But in the chaos, another message traveled faster, not through machines, but through hearts. The star still stands. That was all it took. Across the sector, freeholds rose in defiance. Garrisons mutinied. Navy crews refused to fire on refugee ships. Even some Astartes faltered, their faith shaken by what they saw below. Not rebellion, but humanity rediscovering itself. On the burning plains of Epsilon, Steve fought through the ruins, rallying survivors to the evacuation corridors. When the last ships broke atmosphere, he stood alone on the wall, his uniform scorched, his shield nearly split in two. Over the Vox, an Inquisitor's voice thundered through the flames. "You are one man, Rogers.
One mortal.
You cannot save a galaxy built on gods." Steve looked up at the falling stars, drop pods descending like meteors, and raised his cracked shield once more. "Maybe not," he said, "but I can remind it how to try." Then he ran toward the fire. Every world that burned under the Crusade's wrath carried his legend with it. Every fallen freehold whispered his name before the end. Every surviving soldier who escaped the wreckage carried the mark of the star, and thus began the Star Rebellion, not as an army, but as an idea that the Imperium could not kill because it lived in the one place they could never reach, the human soul. On Terra, the cradle of mankind, the golden world burned without fire. Its towers still shone, its oceans still gleamed, but the air was heavy with unease. From the basalt halls of the imperial palace, where 10,000 silent custodians guarded the corpse of a god, a single name had begun to echo like a curse, the Star-Bearer. Reports poured in from across the segmentum solar, freeholds rising faster than crusades could burn them, regiments refusing to obey planetary purges, entire worlds chanting a name the ecclesiarchy had forbidden to speak. Even on Terra, graffiti appeared in the underhives, a white star drawn beneath the aquila, the words, "Stand free," etched beside it. In the hall of the High Lords, 12 figures gathered in shadow. Each one commanded legions, fleets, or entire sectors of humanity, and yet, even they spoke his name with caution. "This Captain Rogers has united men and aliens alike," rasped the Lord Admiral. "His fleets move faster than ours can respond. He brings order without decree." "Order born of rebellion," hissed the Grand Confessor, his robes heavy with gold. "He defies the Emperor's divine right. He preaches freedom instead of faith." The Fabricator General of Mars spoke next, his voice a mechanical drone. "The relic he carries, his so-called shield, resonates with energy patterns no Imperial technology can replicate. If harnessed, it could change the balance of power." "And if left unchecked?"
asked another, a thin figure cloaked in morning black. "Then it could shatter everything we've built." The chamber fell silent.
Even the air seemed afraid to move. Finally, a voice rose from the end of the table, calm, deep, and ancient. The Regent of Terra, the man who ruled in the Emperor's name. His face was hidden behind a golden mask, his tone measured, almost sorrowful. "For 10,000 years mankind has endured by obedience. We have survived because men believed in the Emperor's perfection, but this
Captain America makes them believe in their own." He stood slowly, the chamber lights bending toward him as if pulled by gravity. "If faith turns inward, the Imperium falls." The Confessor slammed his staff onto the floor. "Then we must kill him. Kill his legend."
"Burn his followers to ash," the Regent turned. "And make a martyr of him? No, martyrs are louder than the living." He looked toward the vast mural of the Emperor's throne, golden and eternal. "If the Star-Bearer believes himself a savior, let him see the truth of godhood. Bring him to Terra. Let him stand before the Emperor and learn what divinity costs." A ripple of unease spread through the
Lords, none had dared to speak the Emperor's name in that way.
As if he still listened, but the Regent continued, "We will not destroy him in battle. We will show him the futility of his ideals. Let him look upon the God Emperor of mankind and see what freedom has built." The order was sealed that night, a silent decree carried through secret channels. Across the void, Inquisitor Veridon received it in the cold darkness of his ship. "Bring the Star-Bearer alive." He stared at the message for a long moment. Then he whispered to himself, "He'll either kneel before the throne, or it will be his grave." Back on the frontier, Steve Rogers didn't yet know that the most powerful empire in the galaxy had turned its full gaze toward him. He only knew that his people were tired, his freeholds battered but standing. Each night he looked at the stars, wondering if the light he saw was still his, or theirs. But far beyond, on a golden throne that had not known movement in 10 millennia, something stirred. A single neuron deep within the withered mind of the Emperor flickered like a candle in a storm. For the first time in an age, he dreamed, and in that dream he saw a man with a broken shield standing against the darkness, and for the briefest moment, the Emperor of mankind remembered what hope felt like. The message came through the void without ceremony, a whisper carried by light and code. It was not a threat, nor a promise. It was a summons. By decree of the High Lords of Terra, the Star-Bearer was ordered to appear before the Golden Throne. The transmission reached the freeholds like a chill wind. Soldiers froze at their posts. Pilgrims knelt in confusion. Even the Tau envoys who had joined the alliance stared in disbelief. Terra, the cradle of mankind, the seat of a god. No mortal was summoned there except to kneel or to die. Steve Rogers read the message twice before speaking.
"Alive," he murmured. "They want me alive." Commander Tashir frowned. "It's a trap."
They'll parade you through the streets, call you a heretic, and burn your movement out with your ashes. Steve studied the horizon. The freeholds had rebuilt again, not stronger but steadier, more human. Fields stretched where craters once were. Children played beside guards who once fought each other. "If I don't go," he said softly, "they'll burn every world that follows me until nothing's left." Tashir's voice cracked.
You can't reason with them." "Maybe not," Steve said.
"But someone has to try." He called his people together that night. Soldiers, engineers, civilians,
even alien allies, and stood beneath the great iron star that crowned their citadel.
The air hummed with quiet tension. "They've asked me to stand before their emperor," Steve said.
"If I go, it's not to kneel.
"It's to speak. For every one of you who was told obedience is all you're worth."
I can't promise I'll come back, but I can promise this. They'll hear what freedom sounds like." He raised his broken shield high.
The crowd was silent, not in fear, but in reverence. When he left, there was no army, no fleet escort.
Only one ship, the old Valkyrie, stripped of weapons,
its hull painted with a single white star. It drifted toward the Sol system in silence. Inquisitor Veridun waited at the docking platform above Terra's orbit. His ship, black and gold, gleamed like a blade in sunlight. He watched the small vessel approach through the viewport, his reflection fractured by the stars. When the airlock opened, Steve stepped out, weary, scarred, but unbowed. Veridun's expression was unreadable.
"You could have fled," he said.
"Half the galaxy would have hidden you." Steve met his gaze evenly. "I don't run from fights that matter." The Inquisitor gestured to the corridor. "Then follow. The throne awaits." They descended through levels of sanctum and steel, passing custodians whose golden armor glowed with ancient power.
None spoke. None needed to.
The hum of the Emperor's will filled the air like gravity itself. At the final gate, Veridun paused.
"When you enter," he said quietly, "remember what stands before you."
"He is not a man. He is the reason humanity still exists," Steve nodded. "Then maybe it's time someone reminded him what humanity looks like." The gates opened. Light flooded the chamber. Not sunlight, not flame, but something older, purer. The golden throne loomed ahead, a mountain of machine and divinity, its cables stretching into infinity, and there, upon it, sat the Emperor of mankind, a corpse that was not dead, a god that was not alive. Steve approached slowly, the echo of his footsteps vanishing beneath the hum of eternity. For a long time, nothing moved. Then deep within the machinery, a pulse, faint, almost imperceptible. A spark of golden light flickered behind the Emperor's hollow eyes. Veridun fell to his knees. The custodians lowered their halberds in reverence, and a voice, ancient, broken, yet infinite, whispered through the air. Why do you come before me? Steve stood tall, his broken shield resting against the floor. Because your people forgot why you fought, the chamber trembled. The air grew heavy like the weight of an entire galaxy pressing down.
Faith endures, freedom destroys, the voice thundered. Steve's reply was steady, human, defiant.
Faith without choice isn't faith. It's fear dressed as loyalty. Lightning crawled across the throne's surface. The custodians tensed. Veridon turned pale, but the voice did not rage. It fell silent, and then, for the first time in 10,000 years, the Emperor laughed, a sound like the cracking of stars, quiet but full of memory. Perhaps. The galaxy still remembers. The light dimmed. The throne went still. Veridon stared in disbelief. What did you do? Steve looked up at the fading glow.
I didn't do anything, he said softly.
He did. And somewhere in the endless sprawl of Terra, for the first time in an age, a single flower bloomed through the dust. The sound rippled across eternity. Not through air or vox, but through the very fabric of the warp itself, that shifting ocean of thought, fear, and faith that bound the galaxy together. When the Emperor's laughter echoed for the first time in 10 millennia, every psyker, every astropath, every sorcerer across the stars heard it. Some fell to their knees in awe, others screamed in terror. And the warp, that boiling sea of madness, paused. For a heartbeat, even chaos itself listened. On holy Terra, alarms blared through the Sanctum Imperialis. The Golden Throne's energy output spiked beyond measure. Entire reactor networks flickered. Custodians rushed to defensive positions, their voices tight with disbelief. He stirred, one whispered. The Emperor stirred. In the Hall of the High Lords, chaos reigned. Servitors failed, data streams glitched, and a blinding sigil of golden light appeared across every screen, the symbol of the throne itself. The Regent of Terra stood before it, his mask trembling in the reflected glow.
Impossible,
he murmured.
It cannot be, the confessor shouted prayers over the vox. He speaks.
The Emperor speaks again, but the message that followed was not prayer.
It was words.
Words that would be recorded, studied, and feared for generations to come. Remember why you fight. The signal burst through the void, carried on psychic waves and astropathic channels. It reached every corner of Imperial space within hours. On dying worlds, soldiers stopped mid-battle. On Forge worlds, machines halted, unsure whether to keep working or to kneel. In hive cities, billions fell silent as the message repeated. Soft, human,
uncommanding. Remember why you fight. And with those words,
something shifted. Faith, once blind and bound in chains of obedience, began to flicker with self-awareness. For the first time, the Imperium questioned, not in rebellion, but in reflection. Deep in the warp, the Chaos God stirred. In the brass palaces of Khorne, rivers of blood froze mid-flow. The Blood God snarled. He remembers?
No, he defies. In the garden of Nurgle, the Plague Father chuckled. Ah, but defiance is life, is it not?
And life always rots. The whispers of Tzeentch coiled like smoke. A single word from him, and 10,000 destinies unravel. The game changes, and in the depths of endless pleasure, Slaanesh smiled. How delightful! The taste of hope after so long. The warp began to churn again, but differently now, stirred by something pure, something untainted. The laughter of a god had changed its rhythm. Back on Terra, Captain America stood beneath the fading light of the throne. His shield hung at his side, reflecting the last golden rays. Inquisitor Veridon approached slowly, disbelief etched across his face. He spoke. The Emperor spoke to you?
No one has heard him in 10,000 years. Steve didn't look at him.
He didn't speak to me, he said quietly.
He spoke to all of us. Veridon clenched his fists.
You don't understand what this means.
You've shattered the order of the Imperium. The ecclesiarchy will twist this.
They'll call it a sign of divine judgment.
The Inquisition will... Steve turned, his expression calm but unyielding.
Let them. Maybe it's time they remembered he wasn't a god. He was a man who believed in one thing, that we could be better. The Inquisitor stared at him, torn between rage and awe. You've doomed us, Steve shook his head. No, I just reminded us we're still alive. Above them the air shimmered, faintly, like sunlight through water. And for a moment, Steve thought he heard that voice again, distant but warm. Carry the light, soldier. He looked up, eyes burning. I will. Then he turned, leaving the chamber behind as custodians knelt in silence, not to worship, but to listen. Across the stars the Imperium trembled. But in that trembling there was something new, not fear. Hope, and hope, in the 41st millennium, was the most dangerous weapon of all. The Emperor's words spread like wildfire through the stars. Unstoppable, undefinable, and utterly transformative. For the first time in 10,000 years, faith itself divided. On Cadia Reborn, banners of gold and crimson fluttered in the void-born wind. Soldiers knelt before statues that now seemed silent, cold, obsolete. Above them, new banners rose, blue and silver, marked by a single star encircled in gold. The Order of the Star, they called themselves. Not heretics, not rebels, believers in the Emperor's original vision. They spoke of duty over dogma, compassion over cruelty, unity over domination. And at their head stood not a priest, not a psyker, but a soldier, a man out of time. Captain America. He travelled from world to world, not as a conqueror, but as a voice. Everywhere he went, he found people tired. Tired of endless war, tired of false prophets, tired of dying for words they no longer understood. On Armageddon, he helped forge peace between Astra Militarum regiments who had been killing each other over a cleric's interpretation of holy fire. On Vostroya, he shielded refugees from their own commissars. And on Macragge, even the proud ultramarines listened when he spoke of justice, not vengeance. The Emperor's light isn't meant to blind you, Steve said before a gathered crowd. It's meant to help you see. Those words spread faster than any Vox transmission, but not everyone saw the light as salvation. In the cathedrals of Terra, the ecclesiarchy burned effigies of the false captain. From pulpits carved from the bones of martyrs,
Cardinals screamed of betrayal. The Emperor's voice was a test,
they cried.
And this Xenos-tainted relic of old Earth has failed it.
The Inquisition divided. Some sought Steve's execution, branding him a chaos infiltrator sent to corrupt humanity from within. Others, the rare few who remembered the Emperor's mortal days, quietly defected, whispering his message in the dark corners of the Imperium. Whole worlds fractured. Civil wars ignited between those who worshipped the throne and those who believed in the star. The warp itself shimmered, uncertain, the collective faith of mankind no longer a monolith of fear, but a storm of doubt, hope, and courage. Amid this chaos, a council gathered on Cyprus Primaris. The banners of dozens of factions hung in a massive amphitheatre built from repurposed cathedral stone and battleship armour. At its centre stood Captain America, his shield resting beside him, the star symbol burned into the marble floor. Opposite him, Inquisitor Veridun approached. No longer an enemy, but not an ally either. "Do you know what you've done?" he asked. "You've torn down the one thing holding this galaxy together." Steve's voice was calm.
"Maybe it's time to build something new," Veridun's tone hardened.
"The Imperium doesn't build, Captain. It survives." Steve turned to the crowd. Soldiers, civilians, even Astartes, all watching, waiting. "Then maybe that's the problem," he said. "Survival without purpose isn't life. It's just endurance." Silence fell. Then, one by one, they began to stand, not with cheers, not with chants, but with quiet, deliberate unity. The Order of the Star was no longer an idea. It was a movement. Across the galaxy, battles erupted between faithful and free, throne and star. Sisters of battle marched against guard regiments carrying the blue sigil. Space Marines found themselves torn between the Codex and their conscience. In the warp, the Chaos Gods watched in delight, for even in hope there was blood. But they miscalculated something profound. This new faith did not feed them. It starved them, for hope, once kindled, is poison to chaos. And across the galaxy, that poison began to spread. In the heart of the storm, Steve Rogers stood on the bridge of a captured Imperial frigate, renamed the Liberty Dawn. Through the viewport, the stars burned bright against the black. He looked toward Terra, the birthplace of both his world and theirs. His voice was quiet but resolute. The Emperor gave them a voice. "Now it's time to give them a choice." The ship turned toward the Sol system. The final journey had begun. The stars themselves seemed to burn brighter as the fleets gathered, a sight unseen. Since the Great Crusade itself, dozens of ships, patched and reforged from the wreckage of fallen empires, assembled in the Black Sea of the Void. Imperial frigates repainted in blue and silver, Tau cruisers bearing hybrid markings, even a few rogue Astartes strike cruisers, their insignias scraped away, their faith renewed in something greater than orders. At the center of it all was a single ship, not the largest, not the most advanced, but the one that carried an ideal. The Liberty Dawn. Within its command chamber, Captain America stood beside his allies. Inquisitor Veridun, the reformed psyker known as Seraphine Holt, and the towering ultramarine captain Galen Oren, who had broken his oaths to follow the message of the star. The void outside glowed with the light of hundreds of ships aligning for translation into the warp. Veridun's voice was low.
"Terra will not negotiate, Steve. The High Lords have already branded you apostate Primarch."
"They will burn every world between here and Sol to stop you." Steve's jaw tightened. "Then we don't go to conquer them. We go to remind them what they were supposed to be fighting for." When the Order's fleets entered the warp, the Immaterium shuddered. This was no ordinary translation. Hope burned through the warp like a torch dipped in oil. For millennia, human ships had traveled these seas carrying only fear, despair, and rage. Aftes, the sustenance of chaos. Now, for the first time, the warp tasted something else. Conviction, and the Chaos Gods screamed. In the eye of Terra, Tzeentch writhed in his crystalline palace, his infinite forms fracturing under a single, impossible truth: faith without fear. "What is this light?" he hissed. "It blinds me!" From his brass throne, Khorne bellowed in rage. "No blood in it, no hate. It disgusts me." But Nurgle only chuckled, swaying in his garden of decay. "Ah, but they live, my brothers. They live truly, and that is more terrifying than any death." And through it all, a new presence stirred, not divine, not demonic, but human. A whisper across the sea of souls. Not all fire burns to destroy. The fleets of the star carved a corridor through the warp, their course unwavering. They emerged at the edge of the Sol system to find it already waiting. A ring of steel and faith encircled the sun. The Imperial Navy, the Grey Knights, the Adeptus Custodes, and 100 sector fleets formed a wall of light. At their center, a single golden beacon pulsed from Terra itself. The Emperor's throne, alive with divine energy. The Vox channels erupted in a storm of voices. Unidentified fleet, you are entering forbidden Imperial space. Power down your engines or be annihilated. Captain Oren's voice growled through the command link. They'll fire the moment we refuse. Steve nodded. Then we don't refuse. He stepped forward to the comm platform. Attention Imperial Command, he said, his voice calm, resonant, and human. I'm not your enemy. My name is Steve Rogers, Captain America. I come not to destroy Terra, but to save it from itself. Silence followed. Then the response came, cold, absolute, and final. The Emperor requires no salvation. The void erupted in light. Lance batteries streaked across the dark, a storm of gold and crimson fire. The first wave of bombardments hammered the Order's outer ships. Shield matrices flared, entire escorts disintegrated, but the fleet held. The Liberty Dawn dove through the chaos, weaving between debris and plasma bursts. Tau drone frigates intercepted missiles, Autobot-inspired interceptors, hybrid machines, built by Wheeljack's descendants on Mars, deflected fire with mirrored armor. Through it all, Steve stood silent, hands gripping the console. He didn't give orders to kill, only to defend. Keep them alive, he said. Every ship, every soul. No one dies for me today, Veridun's voice cut through the noise. Then what do we die for? Steve looked up. We don't die, we change. As the fleets clashed above Terra, lightning tore across the skies of the Imperial Palace. On the Golden Throne, systems flared with activity unseen since the heresy. Energy arced across the God Machine's frame. The Emperor's eyes opened, not with light, but with awareness. His voice rumbled through the webway itself. A storm approaches, one I did not command. Through the vast corridors of the palace, custodians felt it. Not an order, not a command, but a question. Do you remember why I built you? In orbit, the Liberty Dawn broke through the blockade, escorted by battered ships ablaze with blue light. The fleet fell silent as Terra filled the viewport. Vast, scarred, yet beautiful. Steve Rogers looked down at the world that was once his home, now an empire of fire and faith.
10,000 years, he whispered, and you still forgot what freedom means. He reached for his shield, scorched, dented, but unbroken. Then I'll remind you. The Liberty Dawn descended toward the cradle of mankind. The final battle for the soul of humanity had begun.
The skies of holy Terra burned. From the upper atmosphere to the marble spires of the Imperial Palace, the world that had stood as the symbol of mankind's endurance became a war zone once again. The Liberty Dawn cut through the fire like a comet, trailing debris and conviction in equal measure. Below, millions watched the heavens fracture. Pilgrims, soldiers, priests, all seeing something they could not explain. Ships bearing no imperial aquila, but a single, radiant star. The Order of the Star had come home. The ship broke through the final layers of defense. Flak cannons screamed, orbital platforms turned to slag, and thunderhawks fell like burning meteors. On the bridge, alarms blared, but Steve Rogers stood steady, one hand braced against the console, the other resting on his shield. "Bring us down," he ordered. Veridun turned, stunned. "Down! We'll be torn apart!" Steve looked him in the eye. "Then we fall together." The Liberty dawned of. Its hull split through the storm clouds, trailing flame and light. It crashed into the outer sanctums of the Palace of Unity, skidding across molten marble before coming to rest beneath the shadow of the throne's spires. The ramp lowered. Smoke poured out. Captain America stepped into the light of the Emperor's world. The first to meet him were the Adeptus Custodes, golden giants, warriors beyond any mortal comparison, emerged from the dust, their halberds humming with power. The leader, Captain General Trajan Valoris, spoke with the calm certainty of eternity. "None may approach the throne, outsider. Lay down your arms and accept the Emperor's mercy." Steve's voice was low. "Mercy isn't what I came here for." Valoris took a step forward, his armor gleaming like a sunrise. "Then you came to die." Steve raised his shield. "Then let's make it mean something." The air cracked. Valoris struck first, his weapon cutting through the air, faster than any human eye could track. Steve caught the blow, barely, the force driving him to one knee, shield sparking under the impact. But he didn't break. He pushed back, driving his shield into Valoris's chest, the impact ringing like a bell. For a moment, golden and blue light clashed. The will of two soldiers bound by duty, separated by belief.
Around them, the Order of the Star engaged in open combat with the Custodes. Tau battlesuits flanked ultramarine defectors. Sisters of Battle traded fire with reformed guardsmen. Every corridor of the palace became a crucible, faith against faith.
In the Basilica of the God Emperor, Cardinal Geron stood before a colossal statue of the throne and screamed his sermons into the vox. "They bring false light, heresy in the name of hope. Burn them, burn the unfaithful." And across the city, the ecclesiarchy obeyed. Promethium rained from the skies, and Terra became a burning altar. But not everyone obeyed. In the lower levels, hive-born citizens tore down icons and banners, replacing them with hand-painted stars. For the first time in millennia, the people of Terra rose not for survival, but for choice. At the heart of the palace, the great doors of the Sanctum Imperialis trembled. Captain America stood before them, battered, bloodied, his armor cracked. Behind him were those who had followed him across the galaxy: Oren, Veridun, Seraphine Holt, and a handful of soldiers.
None of them spoke. He raised his shield once more and struck the gate. Once, twice. On the third blow, the doors of the Emperor's chamber opened for the first time in 10,000 years. A blinding light filled the hall. Inside, the golden throne
loomed, a monument of divine machinery and living divinity. The air trembled with power. Psychic energy crackled like lightning, and upon the throne sat the Emperor of mankind, eyes open, awake, watching. Steve took a step forward, his voice steady despite the weight of a god pressing down upon him. "I came to talk," he said. The Emperor's voice filled the chamber like thunder and whisper combined. "You are not of this age." "No," Steve said. "But I've seen what it could be." "You defy the order I forged. I defy the cage it became." For a moment, the Emperor was silent. Then faintly, impossibly, he smiled. "You remind me of myself before the fire." Steve lowered his shield. "Then help me end it." The Emperor rose. The air shook. His aura filled the room, gold and white, his voice echoing not in sound but in truth. "I built an empire to save humanity from its own darkness, and in doing so, I became its prison. You would break those chains? Steve met his gaze. If they stop people from choosing what's right, then yes. Silence. Then slowly, the Emperor extended his hand. Then let us see if they deserve it. Outside, the battle halted. Every warrior on both sides froze as light burst from the palace. Golden fire consumed the sky, rising from the throne like dawn breaking over the ashes of 1,000 wars. The voice of the Emperor echoed across the planet. Enough! Weapons fell, flames dimmed, soldiers dropped to their knees as the storm subsided, and when the light cleared, 2 figures stood side by side atop the palace, one in gold, one in blue. The Emperor and Captain America, the Star and the Throne. For the first time since the Age of Darkness, the Imperium was silent. No prayers, no war cries, only the sound of possibility. The Emperor spoke again, his voice now calm, clear, human. The galaxy does not need faith. It needs courage. And Steve turned to the soldiers below. Then let's start there. The light from the golden throne spread across Terra like the first sunrise after 10,000 years of night. Every screen, every Vox channel, every psychic relay in the Imperium echoed the same vision. The Emperor standing, alive, radiant, and changed, not as a corpse god entombed in machinery, but as a being reborn, and beside him stood a man draped not in gold or crimson, but in the colors of a forgotten earth, blue, red, and white. A living echo of everything humanity had once dreamed of being. Captain America. Across the galaxy, silence fell. On 1,000 worlds, Imperial citizens who had never dared to look up from the mud or the chains of their labor stopped to stare at the stars. The light reached them, not holy, not divine, but warm. And for the first time in living memory, they felt something that had no place in the grim calculus of the Imperium. Hope. Within the throne room, that light condensed, drawn inward, folding around the 2 figures. The Emperor's armor cracked and shifted, molten gold giving way to living flesh, his eyes like twin stars behind a mortal face. He looked down at his hands, hands that had once built empires and torn apart gods. Now they trembled. 10,000 years, he said softly, his voice no longer a weapon, but a whisper. I ruled from the shadows of my own failure. Steve stood beside him, his shield dim with soot and blood. Then maybe it's time to step into the light, the Emperor turned to him, studying the man who had defied the galaxy's oldest tyranny. You would give them freedom?
After all they've done?
Steve nodded, because if they can't choose, they'll never change. The Emperor was silent for a long time. Then his gaze lifted toward the heavens, toward the billions of souls who had prayed, killed,
and died in his name. Then I must unmake what I created. The custodies knelt in confusion as the ground beneath Terra began to tremble.
The golden throne pulsed, not in decay, but in transformation. Energy arced from its core, spreading outward in waves that rippled across the planet, the system, the galaxy. Psychic relays burned out.
Astropath screamed.
And then, in every cathedral and shrine of the Imperium, the statues of the Emperor cracked. Some shattered.
Others wept molten tears. The cult of the God Emperor, 10 millennia of belief, began to crumble in a single moment. From the dais,
The Emperor spoke once more, his voice amplified not by technology, but by will itself. My children, You have mistaken survival for salvation.
I do not ask for worship. I ask for understanding.
The Imperium was born of fear. It must now learn courage. Billions fell to their knees.
Others, the ecclesiarchs, the zealots, the inquisitors of blind devotion, screamed in horror. To them,
this was the end of everything, and in truth, it was the end of the old Imperium. The custodes stepped forward, uncertain.
"My lord," Valoris said, his voice trembling.
"Without faith, the Imperium will fall apart." The Emperor looked at him almost kindly. Then it was never strong to begin with. Steve turned toward the open chamber, watching as the light spread beyond the palace, washing over the world like an ocean of gold. "Every empire thinks it's eternal," he said. "No, but people can be," the Emperor smiled faintly. "You are an optimist, Captain Rogers," Steve shrugged. "Just stubborn?" The Emperor's expression softened. "Then perhaps humanity needs a little more of that." Above Terra, the Order of the Star and the Imperial fleets drifted in uneasy silence. Where moments before there had been a war, now there was only the hum of confused machines and trembling hands on silent weapons. The psychic storm cleared. The warp itself began to calm, faintly but undeniably. In its place, something new flickered in the immaterium, an echo of unity unshaped by worship, untainted by fear. For the first time since the fall of the Eldar, the warp quieted. The Emperor turned once more to Captain America. "You have shown me what I forgot," he said, "that strength is not found in rule, but in resolve." He raised his hand, and for a moment the stars themselves seemed to bend. Through the warp, through time, through every shadowed realm, his words resonated, not as command, but as choice. Humanity will stand on its own. The age of the throne ends today. The throne's lights dimmed. Its power faded, not in collapse, but in release. And as its final pulse of energy spread through the palace, the Emperor, the god, the ruler, the symbol, vanished in a burst of radiant light. He was gone. Silence hung in the vast hall. Only Steve remained standing in the glow of the dying throne, the last echoes of gold fading into dust. Veridun approached slowly.
"He's gone." Steve shook his head.
"No, he's everywhere now." Outside, the people of Terra looked up at a clear sky for the first time in centuries, the warp storms parting, revealing stars unwarped by madness, and across the galaxy, new voices rose in the void, not of prayer, but of promise. No gods.
No masters. Only mankind. Steve stepped onto the balcony overlooking the world reborn.
The dawnlight touched his face. He raised his shield, planting it in the marble beside him like a marker, not of victory, but of beginning. "This isn't the end," he said quietly. "It's the first day." The age of rebirth had begun. The galaxy did not end with the Emperor's departure. It changed. For the first time in 10,000 years, the Imperium was leaderless, not in despair, but in potential. The throne sat empty. The cults were broken. The machinery of tyranny, long rusted beneath ritual and faith, began to stir. Not for war, but for rebuilding, and in the void above Terra, where once endless armadas clashed in holy slaughter, the stars were clear. Weeks passed, then months. What was once called the Imperium of Man became something new, fractured, uncertain, yet alive in a way it hadn't been for millennia. They called it the Commonwealth of Humanity, though some whispered another name behind closed doors, the Star Imperium. It was not ruled by saints or priests, but guided by voices, by soldiers, scientists, scholars, workers, all equal before the laws they were writing anew. The great bureaucracies of the administratum were dismantled, the chains of the ecclesiarchy broken, even the Inquisition divided, half clinging to the old faith, half embracing reform under a new code of ethics written not by decree, but by choice. The galaxy was chaotic, unstable, dangerous, but for the first time since the dawn of the Imperium, it was free. Captain America stood upon the balcony of the newly rebuilt Palace of Unity, once the seat of divine rule, now the heart of a republic. Below him stretched a world reborn. Where once there were slave chains, there were builders. Where once there were temples, there were schools. And where once there were prayers for mercy, there were voices raised in debate, laughter, and hope. The banners of the throne were gone. In their place flew the sigil of the star, a simple emblem of unity. Steve looked out over it all, his shield resting at his side, its edges dulled and scarred from 1,000 wars. Veridon joined him, now aged beyond his years, but at peace for the first time. "You did it," he said quietly. "You changed everything." Steve shook his head.
"We did, all of us."
"Even the ones who fought against me. They forced us to find a better way." Veridon smiled faintly.
"And now?"
Steve looked toward the horizon, where the sun rose over the spires of a city rebuilt by the hands of those who had once only known how to fight. "Now," he said, "we teach them how to live across the stars." The message of the star spread on Cadia Reborn. The ruins became the foundation of a thriving world, rebuilt by humans, Astartes, and even Tau engineers working side by side. On Macragge, the Ultramarines became protectors, not conquerors, guardians of the new Commonwealth's ideals. On Armageddon, the forges burned not for war, but for renewal. Even the Mechanicus adapted. They no longer worshipped the machine god, but studied the mysteries of technology as an act of creation, not devotion. Omnissiah, one tech priest wrote in his final log before deleting his title, was never a god. He was curiosity, given form. But the galaxy was not at peace. In the outer fringes, remnants of chaos still festered, their gods weakened, but not gone. The Tyranids stirred, the Necrons awakened. The shadows of the warp whispered in silence, yet something had changed. Where once the Imperium would have answered with fire and fear, now it answered with resolve. Not to destroy, but to defend, because humanity had learned that courage without cruelty could still prevail. Years became decades.
Legends grew. They said the man with the shield never aged.
That he walked among the stars, visiting new colonies and forgotten worlds. That wherever he went, tyranny trembled. Not at his power, but at his example. They called him the star-born guardian, the first liberator, the last captain. Children recited his words as lessons in the new academies. Freedom isn't given, it's earned and protected every day. And though he refused to be called a leader, his presence united worlds more effectively than any throne ever could. One evening, decades after the age of rebirth began, Steve Rogers stood again at the edge of Terra's rebuilt citadel. The sky was filled with stars, not distant, unreachable lights, but destinations. Ships of the Commonwealth traveled freely now, carrying explorers, artists, scientists, not crusaders. He placed his shield upon the marble floor,
its surface reflecting the heavens. "You gave them back their future," a familiar voice said behind him. Steve turned, but no one was there.
Only the golden light that sometimes shimmered in the air when he was alone. He smiled softly.
"You gave it to them first." The light pulsed once, like a heartbeat.
and faded into the night. Steve looked up again at the countless stars waiting to be rediscovered. "Guess it's time to keep moving," he murmured. And with that, Captain America, the soldier out of time, the man who taught a galaxy to hope again, stepped into the light. The shield remained where he left it, resting at the heart of the palace. Engraved beneath it, in simple letters, were the words, "Where one stood for all now stand for each." The galaxy endured, and in its endurance, it finally lived. Peace never lasts. Even in this new dawn of reason and unity, the stars beyond the reach of the Commonwealth remain dark, too silent, too still. For decades, explorers had reported strange readings from the halo fringe, a stretch of void where sensors failed and light itself seemed to bend. Most dismissed the stories as warp mirages, echoes of the old nightmares that once haunted humanity's dreams. But then the stars began to vanish. At first, it was subtle. A colony world here, a mining fleet there, gone without distress calls, without debris. Entire systems erased from records, as if they had never existed. The astrocartograph guilds called it spatial collapse. The new Mechanicus scientists called it gravitic consumption. But across the growing Commonwealth,
one word spread from terrified lips: devourer on Terra.
Now the beating heart of the Commonwealth, the Council of Unity convened. The great hall glowed with light, holograms flickering with disappearing star maps. Captain Steve Rogers stood at the center, surrounded by representatives from human, Astartes, Tau, and Mechanicus factions. A tech priest, his voice crackling with static, recited grim data. Systems Perseus 8 through Perseus 13 missing.
No wreckage.
No warp traces. Pure absence. Tashvar, descendant of the original Tau emissary, frowned.
Nothing leaves no trace. Something took them. Steve's gaze hardened.
Then we find out who. A young adept activated a holofeed. The image wavered, distorted, but one frame burned through the noise. A sphere of black and crimson, covered in machinery and horns of molten metal, drifting through the void like a sleeping god. Its core pulsed once, slow, deliberate, like a heartbeat. The chamber fell silent. Wheeljack's successors had once catalogued every known stellar anomaly.
None had ever matched this. Veridune's voice trembled. "That's no planet." Steve whispered the only word that came to mind. "No, that's a being." The signal came again. Stronger this time, resonating through subspace, through the warp, through Primus itself. An ancient voice, deep as gravity, cold as death. "You rise, my brother, but I will devour." The chamber shook.
Psychic static filled the air. Even untrained humans clutched their heads in agony as the voice echoed across every comm relay in known space. "Is it—"
"Speaking to someone?"
Tashvar asked. Steve's blood ran cold.
"Not to someone," he said.
"To something." Deep beneath the surface of Cybertron, now reawakened and reborn as Primus, guardian of the new order, the ground trembled. Golden conduits flared alive, streaming
with data and energy, a voice, vast and mechanical,
yet gentle as thunder, spoke across the planet's core. "I feel him." My brother stirs once more. The Council's holofeed blazed to life, connecting directly to Cybertron's heart. The face of Primus, shimmering through light and circuitry, filled the chamber. "Unicron," he said, "the Chaos Bringer, the World Devourer. My opposite, my shadow." Steve stepped forward. "You know him?" "I was forged to balance him," Primus replied. But I was weakened, scattered across time, my spark dimmed by the wars of flesh and machine. Now he wakes to consume what little harmony remains. The council erupted in voices, panic, strategy, denial. But Steve stayed silent, watching the map as Unicron's path lit up like a spreading wound. Whole sectors began to vanish. Not destroyed, erased. Stars imploded without sound, planets folded into themselves, and the warp itself bent around the void of his hunger. Every broadcast ended the same way. A low, rhythmic pulse, like a monstrous heartbeat. Steve watched it all unfold.
Hands clenched at his sides.
They had finally built a galaxy worth saving, and now something beyond reason had come to take it. He turned to Primus's projection.
How do we stop him?
Primus's voice reverberated through the chamber like the tolling of an ancient bell. Unicron cannot be stopped. He can only be contained or awakened fully before he consumes the stars from within. Awakened? Veridon shouted.
You want to bring him more alive? Primus' eyes blazed like suns. If he rises blind, he will devour reality itself. But if I awaken him, if I confront him, there may yet be balance. Steve's jaw set.
Then we do it together. Primus's tone softened. You would stand against the end itself, mortal? Steve raised his battered shield, the paint chipped but the stars still gleaming. I've stood against worse. The great machine god fell silent for a moment, and then softly, almost reverently, replied, Then mankind has earned its place among the eternal. The council broke into motion. Fleets were armed, warp gates aligned, and Cybertron began to stir, transforming once again into the divine war form of Primus, shining brighter than a sun as it rose from its orbit. Steve Rogers stood on its command platform, surrounded by the descendants of Autobots, Tau pilots, and human commanders. Before them stretched the infinite dark, and somewhere within it, the heart of the Devourer beat, slow and patient. The Commonwealth's greatest test was coming, not of politics,
not of faith,
but of endurance. Steve looked toward the stars one last time. Then let's remind him. Some worlds don't go quietly. Cybertron's engines ignited, and the stars trembled. The age of rebirth was over. The war of the brothers had begun. The void itself screamed. In the depths of intergalactic space, where even the warp dared not breathe, two titanic presences stirred, one of radiant order, the other of devouring chaos, Primus and Unicron, brothers born before time, makers and unmakers of creation. And now they awakened to finish the war that had begun at the dawn of all things. Cybertron no longer just a world, but the living body of Primus, blazed with divine energy.
Mountains folded into armor.
Cities retracted into cannons.
Rings of plasma encircled the planet like halos of fire. At its heart,
Captain America stood upon the command dais, surrounded by the glowing forms of Autobot and human alike, linked through the neural lattice of Primus itself. Every voice spoke in unison through the comms. For the light, for the living. Across the galaxy, humanity watched through broadcast relays. The stars dimmed as Unicron appeared, not emerging, arriving. A world of molten black metal and burning chasms, vast beyond comprehension. His eyes, twin suns of red, opened, and the void rippled with his hunger. His voice rolled across the cosmos. You dare to rise again, brother? Primus answered, his tone calm but resolute. I rise because there is still life to protect. Unicron moved, planets shattered in his wake, pulled apart by tidal gravity.
Asteroid fields vaporized.
Nebulae burned. His approach distorted reality. Space folding like paper, time stuttering. He reached for Cybertron as one would crush an insect. Primus met him with light. Bolts of plasma the size of continents lanced across the void, carving through Unicron's armor. Each strike shattered space itself, sending shockwaves that rattled the warp, but the Devourer only laughed. You cannot destroy what is.
Inevitable, he opened his maw, a vortex of singularity, and ate the light. Entire battleships vanished into that darkness.
Shredded before their signals could even fade. Steve braced against the tremors, gripping the rail as Primus's core shuddered. "Keep firing," he shouted.
"He bleeds! Make him feel it!"
Inside Primus's consciousness, Steve could feel it. A storm of willpower, pain, and memory stretching across eternity. He wasn't commanding a ship. He was sharing a soul. Primus' voice resonated within him. He feeds on despair. You must hold hope steady. It is my only weapon. Steve closed his eyes, breathing deep, focusing. He remembered Earth, the Brooklyn streets, the sound of laughter, the simple idea that one person standing up could change everything. He focused on that. Light spread through Primus's circuits like wildfire. The god world flared brighter than a supernova. Unicron recoiled, his armor blackening under the surge. For the first time, the Devourer screamed. From across the Commonwealth, fleets joined the fray. Tau cruisers unleashed energy cascades from their new hybrid cores. Human warships, once built for conquest, now flew in defense of existence itself. Astartes strike groups burned through Unicron's hull like furious wasps, guided by light rather than faith. It was not an army of gods. It was an army of mortals who refused to kneel. Steve's voice echoed across every channel. He's not a god. He's fear.
And fear only wins if we stop fighting.
Unicron's counterstrike came like the end of all things. He reached through the void with tendrils of molten shadow, tearing through fleets, dragging ships into his maw. Each impact sent tremors through Primus's frame. Circuits cracked. Continents broke apart. Structural integrity falling, called a tech adept. We're losing orbit.
Primus' voice shook. My strength wanes.
Steve pressed his hand to the central console.
Then take mine. You cannot take it.
Primus hesitated, then obeyed. The neural lattice connected. Human and God became one. Steve's mind exploded into infinity. He saw the cosmos as Primus did. Every star, every life, every heartbeat. He felt the pulse of the galaxy like blood through veins of light. And with that vision came resolve. He was Cybertron now, the shield of creation itself. "Let's end this," he said. Primus's eyes blazed. Reflecting the captain's star across both hemispheres, the two titans collided. Their impact split reality itself. Warp and matter twisted together, forming a storm of annihilation. Galaxies quaked. Primus drove his core light into Unicron's chest, searing through endless layers of darkness.
Unicron roared, his voice shaking the cosmos. You cannot kill entropy!
Steve's answer came from every speaker, every heart linked to Primus. Maybe not.
But I can fight it, Primus ignited.
Light poured from every crevice, every wound, a final act of defiance. Unicron convulsed, his form cracking, fissures spreading across his surface like shattered glass. He reached out one last time, but the light consumed him, the void filled with brilliance, and then silence. When the glow faded, only fragments remained. Drifting debris, fragments of a world too vast to understand. Cybertron floated wounded but alive, its surface molten but stable. Primus' voice was faint now but calm.
He's gone, for now.
You have done what even gods could not. Steve exhaled slowly, the link fading, his human mind trembling from the enormity of what he had witnessed. He whispered, "We're not gods, Primus.
We're people."
We just finally remembered what that means." Primus's light dimmed, almost like a nod. "Then perhaps that is why you prevailed." Across the Commonwealth, silence turned to awe, and awe to celebration. The War of the Brothers had ended. The galaxy lived. But in the distant dark, beyond the light of all known stars, fragments of black metal drifted, pulsing faintly, like the echo of a heartbeat. The war was over, but the shadow was not gone. And as Captain America stood upon the repaired surface of Cybertron, shield in hand, he knew what came next. Peace wasn't a reward. It was a promise, one that needed to be kept every single day, as long as one person stands for it, he said quietly. The light will never die. The war had ended, but the silence that followed was heavier than victory. Where once the heavens blazed with titanic fury, now only drifting embers remained. The fractured remnants of Unicron's body scattered like tombstones across the void. The galaxy was scarred, but alive. Cybertron, Primus, floated once again in solemn orbit, its molten wounds cooling into veins of gold. The world god slept, his consciousness folded deep within his metallic core. His last words echoed softly through every Autobot circuit, every machine that had once felt his light. Balance restored until the next dawn. Captain America stood upon Cybertron's rebuilt surface, overlooking a horizon of living metal and crimson sky. He no longer felt the pulse of Primus in his mind. The voice was gone, the shared awareness faded. What remained was a hollow ache, and a memory that stretched beyond time. He'd seen infinity. He'd stood inside the heart of creation itself. And now he was only human again. RC approached from behind, still the same fierce warrior, though her armor was cracked and scorched. "You look tired," she said. Steve smiled faintly.
"I think I just remembered what that feels like." RC gazed out over the horizon.
"We won, Steve. Unicron's gone. For now," he replied softly. "But victory's never forever."
"It just buys time." She tilted her head. "And what will you do with yours?"
He looked down at his shield, resting against a piece of melted ground. The star at its center, dulled, but still visible. "Teach them," he said, "not how to fight, but how to keep what they fought for." Across the Commonwealth, the galaxy began to heal. Worlds once turned to war found purpose in rebuilding. Tau and human engineers restored lost colonies together. The Mechanicus, forever changed by the sight of gods and machines intertwined, devoted themselves not to worship, but to understanding. The Astartes, too, were reborn, not angels of death, but protectors of life. The Codex Astartes was rewritten under a single principle: honor without mercy is tyranny. On Terra, the once holy cathedrals became archives of knowledge. The banners of the star and the throne now hung side by side, one for courage, one for remembrance. Veridun, the old Inquisitor who had once sought Steve's death, stood at the rebuilt Palace of Unity, watching the sunrise. His aged voice carried a quiet wisdom now. "When I first met you," he said, "I thought you were naive." "You still are," Steve chuckled. "I take that as a compliment. Veridun nodded slowly. As you should. Because it was that naivety that saved us. The kind that refuses to believe the world has to be cruel to survive. He looked up, eyes glinting in the morning light. The Emperor would have been proud. Steve's voice softened. No, he'd have been human. But not all was peace. At the edge of the void, fragments of Unicron's remains drifted, faintly glowing, whispering across subspace in patterns that even the Mechanicus dared not interpret. Every so often, one of those fragments pulsed, sending ripples through the warp, echoes of a will that refused to die. But, for now, they were distant, harmless, dormant. The galaxy would rebuild in the shadow of that memory. 1 year after the War of the Brothers, a monument was raised on Cybertron, a colossal structure shaped like a hand reaching toward the stars. Its inscription was simple. We stood between creation and oblivion and chose to live. At its base stood the captain's shield, embedded into the metal as a symbol of unity. No crown, no throne, just a shield, a promise. Steve Rogers walked among the workers, unnoticed and uncelebrated, dressed like any other man. He preferred it that way. As he passed a group of children playing with small, star-shaped toys, one of them looked up and asked, "Mister, were you one of the people who fought in the war?" Steve smiled softly.
I just helped some friends stand up when it mattered. The child nodded thoughtfully.
My dad says heroes don't win wars. They stop them. Steve's smile grew. Your dad's a smart man. The boy tilted his head. Will the bad stars ever come back? Steve glanced up at the night sky, endless, beautiful, and uncertain. Maybe, he said. But if they do, there'll be someone waiting for them. He walked on, his silhouette fading into the glow of the twin suns. In the heart of Cybertron, deep within the sleeping mind of Primus, a faint echo stirred, not of war,
Not of prophecy.
but of gratitude. Thank you, soldier. Steve paused mid-step, looking up, and smiled. The galaxy was quiet now.
Not dead, not conquered, just alive. And for Captain America that was enough. Centuries passed.
Then, millennia. The Commonwealth faded into history, its ideals absorbed into cultures and languages scattered across 1,000 settled systems. Empires rose again, some noble, some cruel, each claiming to carry the torch of those who came before. But the truth of what had happened, of the man who defied gods, drifted into myth. On the reborn Terra, now a peaceful garden world of knowledge and memory, the Palace of Unity still stood. No longer a throne, no longer a fortress, just a monument. Within its heart, encased in transparent alloy, rested a single relic, a circular shield, worn and cracked, its once bright star dulled by time. No guards protected it.
None were needed.
For everyone knew the legend, the man from another time, the soldier who stood against the end, the star that would not fade. Children whispered his name during the Unity festivals. Scholars debated whether he had truly existed or whether he was only a story meant to inspire. But every year, when the sun set over the white towers of Terra, the last rays always struck that shield, and for a heartbeat, the star gleamed again. Far beyond the heart of the Commonwealth, in a system untouched by light for ages, a lone exploration vessel drifted through a graveyard of stars. Its crew were descendants of the reborn Mechanicus, now explorers and archivists rather than zealots. They were mapping anomalies in the far halo fringe, tracing the faint energy signatures of an ancient war long forgotten. Then their sensors found it, a sphere of fused alloy buried in the crust of a dead moon. No life signs, no power, but deep inside, a pulse. They drilled through the rock and uncovered a fragment of the past, a body encased in crystalline metal, preserved perfectly by time and something far greater than technology. When they brought light upon it, they saw a familiar shape, a man tall and calm, his face untouched by age. In his hand rested a broken piece of a shield, its surface engraved with a single symbol, a star. One of the explorers, trembling, whispered the words that had outlived empires. The captain. They brought him aboard. As their ship's AI analyzed the alloy encasing him, it reported an anomaly. Chronostasis, temporal stasis field maintained by unknown energy. Source, Primus-derived quantum residue. And then, before they could finish the scan, his eyes opened. Blue, clear, ancient, but alive. Steve Rogers sat up slowly, the dust of eternity falling from his shoulders. "How long?" he asked, voice steady as ever. "Records incomplete," the captain stammered.
"At least
12 million years. Steve stood, steady on his feet, and looked out the viewport at a sky of broken constellations and drifting wreckage. The Commonwealth was long gone. Even the stars he'd once known had burned out. But something in that darkness stirred, faint, hungry. A deep vibration rolled through the ship. Alarms blared. The instruments screamed as a massive gravitational wave washed over them. From beyond the dead nebulae, a shape moved, not light, not matter, but something that pulsed like an ancient heartbeat. Steve's gaze hardened. He's not done. He looked down at the broken shield fragment, brushed his thumb across the star, and smiled faintly. "Then neither am I." He turned to the stunned crew. "Prep the engines. Set a course for the core systems. There's work to do." They hesitated, awestruck. "Who are you?" one whispered. Steve looked out at the stars. Faded, distant, but still there. "Just a soldier," he said. Still standing watch, the engines roared to life, and the ship disappeared into the void. A spark of light cutting through an ocean of shadow. Somewhere, deep in the sleeping metal heart of Primus, a golden pulse answered. Slow, patient, eternal. "Welcome back, Captain." And in that distant future, where gods had died and galaxies forgotten their own names, the legend began again. The star still burned.
And as long as it did, humanity would never be lost. Time no longer moved in centuries or millennia.
It moved in epochs. Stars were born and died like sparks. Civilizations rose and vanished between breaths. Yet, through it all, a single legend endured, passed from one age to the next like a flame that refused to go out. They called it the Star Eternal. In the mythic records of the new cosmic era, historians spoke of a being who appeared at the turning points of existence, a man clad in light, carrying a round shield of impossible strength, walking worlds long dead, speaking words older than empires. Stand. Remember who you are. No one knew his origin. Some said he was a guardian sent by Primus, the last spark of the god machine's soul. Others said he was a dream made real, humanity's collective hope given form. But in the hearts of those who faced despair, he was simpler than legend. He was the captain. The galaxy itself had changed beyond recognition. The stars of the Commonwealth were gone, replaced by great rings of artificial light encircling newborn suns. The species that had once called themselves human were scattered, evolved, hybrid, many now more machine than flesh. Yet, even in this far future, they still painted the same symbol upon their armor, their ships, and their cities, a single 5-pointed star. It meant something that words could no longer explain. unity through choice.
Strength without cruelty, light without worship. And somewhere beyond all mapped space, upon a lonely world of crystal and dust,
Captain America stood once more. He was unchanged, not immortal, not divine, but preserved by forces that defied every law of nature. Time had become a river flowing around him. He walked across the barren horizon beneath a fractured sky, his shield slung across his back. Far above, galaxies danced like embers, echoes of battles long past. As he walked, he spoke softly, as though to an unseen friend. "I used to think peace was an ending," he said. "Now I know it's just the next fight, one you don't win by force, but by standing long enough to keep the light burning." He stopped, looking out across the void. A faint shimmer in the distance, golden and vast, flickered through the atmosphere. Not a sun, not a ship. Something older, familiar. "Primus?" Steve murmured. The voice that answered was warm and infinite, resonating not through sound, but through every atom of air. "You kept the balance, soldier."
Even gods fade, but the light you carried never did. Steve smiled, his voice barely above a whisper. "I wasn't the light.
"I just held the line until someone else could carry it. Then your watch is over." The horizon brightened. Golden light rolled across the desert, washing over him like sunrise. Steve took one last look at his shield, resting it gently in the sand. Its star gleamed once more, pure, unbroken, eternal. He straightened, the faintest trace of peace on his face. "Then I'll finally rest," he said softly. The light embraced him, and as his form faded into the brilliance, the words he had once spoken echoed across creation, carried by memory, by myth, by every living soul that would ever rise against the dark. As long as one stands for what's right, the star will never fall. 1,000,000,000 years later, explorers from another age found that same world. They discovered only a shield, half buried in gold dust, still shining against the void, and when their scanners activated, the planet's magnetic field pulsed once, like a heartbeat. Then the shield glowed, faintly, as if acknowledging them. The message encoded within it was short, almost human in its simplicity. "Keep standing." The explorers looked at one another, awe and reverence in their faces, for in that instant they understood the star was not a symbol. It was a promise, and somewhere beyond time, beyond gods and galaxies, Captain America still stood watch.